and the deterioration of the family at the global scale is what we're going to talk about in the second International Symposium of CFPP. At the beginning, we'd like to commemorate those who lost their lives in Çanakkale, Sarıkamış, and other places. So I'd like to call you for a minute of silence, and we're going to have the Turkish national anthem. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to invite Ms. Zuhal Öztürk to give the opening speech. She is the World President of CFPP. Assalamu alaikum. Distinguished rectors, distinguished people of science, ladies and gentlemen, all the audience, welcome everyone. As the World CFPP, we are putting together the second international symposium. We're going to be hosting 20 academics from the United States and the UK, and we are in collaboration with 6 universities. The World CFPP is built by about 60 NGOs and about 30 people of science. The concern of this platform is the family and children who are being dragged into a deformation process. We are trying to underline this issue. Can I get some water, please? The family and its values, children are being exposed to a lot of global dangers, and it's a humanitarian duty to protect them against these threats. Recently, the children of the world are being faced, are being exposed to some global pressures that are being shaped by the dominant understandings, and they're being directed to unhealthy sexual orientations, and in recent years there's an increase in confusion of sexual orientation, and the discussions on that is on the rise. The homosexual lifestyle is being promoted, and global readings and public evaluations are bringing negative effect on that issue, and it is deteriorating the family and the future generations. And this is why we prioritize this issue. The reflections in our country made us take that issue in this symposium. Our aim is to protect the family and its values on the face of global threats, and we want to raise awareness and take measures as World Checkup. We want to handle the issue in a multidimensional manner and evaluate this in two basic dimensions. The first of these dimensions is the medical and psychiatric dimensions of the confusion in sexual orientation, and the second one is the debate on sexual identity and asexual identities. Homosexual lifestyle is being promoted, especially with digital media, and there are legal sanctions on that issue as well. And the global sociological dimension requires us to evaluate the issue in two different ways, and it is basically bringing a lot of confusion into the debate. As World Checkup
ve psikoterapotik pratikler neticesinde
as a result of comprehensive research and psychotherapeutic studies, indicate that the confusion in sexual orientation and the attraction to the same sex is going to bring psychological and psychosomatic diseases, and etiology of this disease needs to be researched, and the treatment techniques should be offered. So on that issue, those who demand psychological therapy should be provided with a good therapy by the experts in the field. So it is a human right to a healthy and happy life, and we want to deliver it to each and every one. The platform is also looking into the other side of the coin. The psychodevelopmental dimension of the issue is being ignored, and immoral dependencies, depression, AIDS, and other sexual diseases are being created by this kind of lifestyle. It is shortening the lifespan. I'm talking about the homosexual lifestyle, by the way, and this is being promoted for about 200 years. It's basically a project. And to raise public awareness on that issue, we see that as a social responsibility project. Distinguished audience, I'd like to end my speech with a quotation from Necip Fazıl. The state should raise the children from externally, and the family internally, and together we're going to protect our family and the next generation, and this is a matter of survival. Thank you very much. I'd like to salute you with respect.
Hocamıza çok teşekkür ediyoruz.
Thank you very
Çok
much,
sağ olsun.
Professor,
Böylesi önemli bir konuda
on
böylesi büyük gayretler sarf ediyor.
an important
İnsanların bu
issue.
kadar çok
She's spending a lot of
üzerine gittiği bir
effort.
konuda. Hocam en son Necip Fazıl'dan bir atıf yaptı. Ben de yine Necip
She
Fazıl'dan
brought a
hocamıza
quotation from Necip
karşılık
Fazıl, and let me
devam
respond
edelim.
in kind.
Sakarya, saf çocuğu masum Anadolu'nun
Sakarya is the
divanesi,
pure
biz
child
kaldık
of the
Allah
innocent
yolunda hocam.
Anatolia, and
Dağının.
we
Allah yar
are
yardımcınız olsun
the only
hocam.
two crazies on the way of
Evet,
Allah.
şimdi de konuşmalarını yapmak üzere
Now, I'd like to invite
Medeniyet Üniversitesi Rektörümüz Sayın Gülfettin Çelik'i alkışlarınızla huzurlarınıza davet ediyorum.
the
Buyurun hocam.
rector of Medeniyet University. I'd like to invite Gülfettin Çelik.
Efendim, madem özlü sözlerden başladık,
As we are speaking of
ben de
proverbs,
İsmet bir cümle ekleyeyim.
let me add a line from İsmet Özel,
Uzun
the
yola
Turkish
çıkmayı
poet.
tanımı herhalde bizim bu konumuzun önemiyle de son derece örtüşüyor gibi gözüktü.
I always like
Bugün yeryüzünde küresel
hitting
ölçekte
the road for
önemli
long
görmüş
journeys.
olduğumuz gündem başlıklarını
Today,
saysak,
if we put together the global
elinden az
agenda,
başlık çıkmaz.
we would have about 50 of them, right?
İklim değişikliğinden,
From
denizin,
climate
havanın
change
kararının
to the
kirliliğine
pollution of
varıncaya
the
kadar,
seas,
ya da
air,
fakirlikten
and the lands,
göçe
and
varıncaya
from
kadar
poverty to
yeryüzünde var olan
migration,
problemler
we have a lot of
50 yıl
problems
öncesinden çok daha
on the
fazla
earth,
düzeye
and
ulaşmış
they
durumda.
are much more than
Ve
they
ana
used to be
hattıyla
like
da
50 years
çözümlenmiş,
ago.
artık evet bir çözüme vardık diyebileceğimiz,
And
hatırlayabildiğim bir başlıkta yok.
I don't remember a title, a theme that I can say that we resolved. So the problems are snowballing.
Elbette bir taraftan
Of course, on the one
çözümlemek
side,
geliştirirken,
we
diğer
are
taraftan
trying
da
to bring
varmış olduğumuz
solutions,
neticeyi de analiz etmek,
and on the other side, we have to evaluate the results that
uzmanların
we
yanında
obtain.
üst idarecilerin,
Alongside
uluslararası
the
ölçekte
experts,
yöneticilerin elbette başlıca sorunlarını
It
birisi olmalı.
is basically a responsibility for the management at the global scale.
Bugün itibariyle beraber olmuş olduğumuz
As of
konunun
today,
uzmanlar düzeyinde ele alınıyor
we're
olması,
going to talk about a delicate matter, and it is giving us hope that it is being handled at the expert level.
var olan
Going
diğer
into
problemlerin içinde
details
bir örneklik teşkil etmeli.
is going to set an example to the other
Ve
problems.
en nihayetinde çözümü
And
geliştirecek olanlar da ihtisas sahibi
finally, at the end of the day,
diye
it's going to be the experts who's going to
diğer
offer solutions.
kamu politikası inşa
However,
edicilerin ve uygulayıcıların
For
da
those who
sorumluluğu
make
göz ardı
public
edilmemeli.
policies, they have a responsibility on that
Ve
issue
bütün
as
konular bu
well.
itibarla
So
daha
all these
küresel
issues
evrensel ölçekte ele
are
alınmayı hak
going to
ediyor.
be, they deserve to be handled at the global
Biz
level.
Batı dünyasıyla olan ilişkilerimizde
In our relations with the
asırlardır bir
Western
takım zorluklar
world,
yaşadık.
we have had some difficulties
Bu
throughout
problemlerin büyük
the
bir kısmının da
centuries.
o kaynaklı olduğunu farkındayız.
We realize that some of these problems
Ancak
stem
Batı
from
ile
the
olan
West,
ilişkiler ya da
but
Batı dünyası
in our
üretmiş olduğu
relations
kaynaklar
with the
alanının
West,
sadece uzmanlıklarla çözülemeyeceği de hakikat
or the problems that the West creates cannot be resolved
Malumunuz,
with expertise only.
1492
As you know, in 1492, when Columbus
hemen 50 yıl
discovered
kadar sonrasında
America,
bütün Batı dünyası
about 50
oraya
years
aktı
later, the whole
inanılmaz
Western
bir
world
imparatorluk oluştu.
flew into this new discovered land and
Yolda
created
gelirken düşündüm.
an enormous empire.
1870'li yıllara kadar yani dünya
When I
sanayi
was
devriminin artık atılım yapacağı
coming
şeye varıncaya
here,
kadar sadece Afrika'da
I was
o
thinking
dünyaya
until
8.6 milyon insan göç
1870s,
ettirilmiş.
only from Africa, 8.6 million
Bunlar köle yemeği olarak
Black
bakılıyor.
Africans were
Yani
forcefully
sanayileşme bu
migrated
şekilde bir
to
sömürüyle, bu şekilde
to
insani
North America.
doğal
So
hayatı yok saymayla
industrialization started with ignoring the natural life and
yaklaşık 500 yıldır
practices
var olan
of
bu süreç,
slavery. For about
maalesef başka
5
gündemleri tekrar ortaya
centuries,
çıkaracak bir şekilde
we have had this process, and it
Demek
is
istediğim nokta şu.
moving forward to create other problems. So if we are to find the solutions to these problems, we're going to have to go down to root causes,
Varıncaya kadar
and
dünya
about the
algısına
root
varıncaya kadar
causes,
derinlere iniyor.
we have to go down to worldview and the perception of world. Let me just give you
Daha
a
batıya,
small
yeni
example.
batıya, keşfedilmiş olan yeni batıya girişinde
West's
1532 yılı
journey to
önemli bir
further
tarihtir.
west, 1532 is an important
İnka
date.
İmparatorluğu ile Batı dünyasının karşılaşma tarihi.
That is when the Inca Empire met
İspanyol İmparatorluğu'nun
the Western world.
komutanlarından birisi olan
The Spanish
Pizarro'nun
Empire had a commander called Pizarro,
İnka İmparatoru Atahualpa ile karşılaşması olayı
and
vardır.
he met the Incan Empire
968 kişilik bir askeri
Atahualpa.
birlik, İspanyol birliği,
It
80
is
bin kişilik bir
168
orduyu yenmiştir orada.
troops, Spanish troops, defeated
savaşa da
80,000
Tamamen
Incan
bir
army.
yenmiştir.
They defeated the Inca army
Pizarro
with
Atahualpa'ya buyurun
deceit.
gelin görüşelim dediğinde
When
o da
Pizarro
çok
said,
çok
let's have a
safiyane bir şekilde
meeting to
onun yanına ordusuyla
Atahualpa,
vardığında bir hileyle onu esir almışlardır.
Pizarro
8 ay
took him
boyunca
as
Atahualpa esir kalmış.
hostage, and for 8 months
En
the
nihayetinde
Incan Emperor
5
was
metre,
a
7
hostage
metre
to
ve 2,5
the
metre
Spanish
çapında
commander.
bir odayı doldurabilecek
at the
büyüklükte bir
end,
altın karşılığında Atahualpa'yı
A room full of
teslim etmeyi, iade
gold
etmeyi
was
öğrenen
demanded
Pizarro,
in
sözünde
return for
durmayarak
giving up
Atahualpa'yı öldürmüş ve
Atahualpa,
böylece o
and
bölgeyi ele
he
geçirmiştir.
got the gold, but he didn't keep his promise. He killed the emperor
bizim
and took
ilişkilerimiz
over his
maalesef
land.
Dünden bugüne Batı ile
Our
olan ilişkilerimiz
relations
hep serencamlı geçmiş oldu.
have had
Endişem
such
musluğun tamir
a
edilmeden
nature.
damlaların
My
düşen damlaların
problem
temizlenmesine
is
çare olmayacağı.
that, my
Bu itibarla
concern is
bunu
that
çok teknik
we
olarak
should
ele
not
aldığımız
try
bir
and
konu. Diğer
clear the
kamu
water, but
yöneticileri
we
ya da
should
ilgili
basically fix
otoritelerce de
the
daha
fountain.
geniş kapsamda gündemde tutulması ihtiyacı
So,
vurgu yapmak istedim.
this issue should be handled
Başarılar
at,
diliyorum.
at a broad
Teşekkür ederim.
level. Thank you very much, and please accept my prayers to have a beautiful meeting.
Profesör Doktor Sayın Gülfettin Çelik Hocam.
Thank you,
çok teşekkür
Professor
ediyoruz.
Çelik.
Değerli konuklar, şimdi
Distinguished
programa,
guests,
yani esas programa, konuşmalara
we are
geçiyoruz.
now going to start with
Ancak
the
geçmeden önce
speeches,
hemen
but
değerli, kıymetli konuşmacılara şunu hatırlatmak isterim. Lütfen
I'd like to
sahnedeyken,
remind the speakers
sizleri
once
verdiğim
again,
programlar önünde,
please
saate
remain in
riayet
the boundaries
edersek,
of time.
süreye riayet edersek çok
Please follow
seviniriz.
the time restrictions.
Cinsiyetin ve
Now,
cinselliğin
we
nefs
are going
psikolojisi
to talk
açısından
about
ince
the
hakikati
delicate truth
konulu
of sex and
sunumu yapmak
sexuality
üzere
from the
uzman doktor
perspective
Sayın Mustafa
of
Merter'i
the
alkışlarınızla
psychology of
huzurlarınıza davet ediyoruz.
nefs.
Buyurun hocam.
I'd like to invite Professor Dr. Mustafa Merter to deliver his speech.
Tamam. Sesim geliyor mu? Eyvallah.
Do you have my voice? I salute you with
Bunun
respect,
cinsellik olduğu halde
despite the
nefs
fact that
yapısı üzerinden,
the theme of the day is sexuality today. I'd like to talk about the structure of the nefs, and I'd like to talk about the fine truth of sexuality.
hadifi hatırlatırım.
Let me just remind you a hadith.
Eğer biz Rabbimizi
If we want to know our Creator, we have to know our nefs. So,
nefsimiz üzerinden
for that, we're going to have to know this delicate truth of sexuality. So, let's talk about the nefs. Where did it come from? Why do we have this concept? Let me start with a funny story.
kaldıktan sonra
After staying in Switzerland for long years,
yerleştim.
I
Bir gün Bodrum'da bahçe
settled in
alanında
Bodrum, and one day I was just going around, and I had a very inflated ego back in the time. I was an assistant at Sege-Jungen University.
Jung'u esas
I have studied Freud and Jung,
Heidegger
and I was equipped with knowledge on Heidegger, and I was a psychiatrist at that thing who who knew everything. And I met an
Dede
old
dedi, oğlum sen ne yapıyorsun?
person,
Ben dedim işte buraya
a
yerleştim.
grandpa, and the
Mesleğim
grandpa
dedi.
said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm planning to settle here," and he asked me what I did, and I said, "I'm a psychiatrist," and he said, "Okay, you are at the very right place." About 34 years back,
Oğlum dedi.
and
Sana bir
he
şey
said,
soracağım.
"I'd like
biraz
to ask
cahil
you one
birisiyim.
thing. I'm an
Şu
ignorant
dedi,
person.
psikenin bana ne olduğunu bir anlatın.
Can you
Ben
please
burada
teach me what the
anlamıyorum oğlum dedi.
psyche is? I don't really
Fakat
understand
kıvırmaya
that."
başladım.
And I started going around the
Efendim
issue,
dedim,
you
bu
know?
dedim,
And I
Freud'a
said,
göre
"Sir,
bir
according to
buzdağı gibi."
Freud, this is like an
Amca
iceberg."
bana böyle baktı.
And the grandpa looked at me like
Baktım
that.
tutmuyor.
And I said, "He's not buying what I said." And according to Jung, it could be basically resembled to a sphere. And he still kept looking at me the same way. And I smiled, and he smiled back. And that basically stuck in my mind. And
Ben bu kadar çok şey bildiğimi zanneden ben bunun cevabını ben nasıl veremedim?
I said, "How can I not know the answer to this question?"
Macera başladı.
This is my journey on my research started. Where this journey headed into, well, into your own world, into your depths, basically. Once you start looking into something like that, and if you have good wills, the help is going to come. Rumi, in one of his lines, he said, "It's your holy house has 900 layers." So
bir yapıda var olduğumuzu öğrendim.
we have a multi-layered structure.
Birinci kitabımın adını da
So this is why I
900 katlı
entitled
insan
my first book as
koydum.
Human with 900 Stories.
Bazı ayet-i kerimelerin psikolojik açıklamasını vererek
Through a
ailelerinize
scheme, I'd like to give you psychological explanations of some verses, and I'd like to give you an approach to that, and I'd like to connect the issue to sexuality. You see the scheme here on the screen. Roberto Assaglioli,
ekolünün
the
zat-ı halinizin suyundan içebilir miyim efendim?
founder of psychosynthesis,
Teşekkür ederim. Psikosentez ekolünün kurucusu.
he's the founder of the School of
Freud'dan
Thought
ve
on
bundan
psychosynthesis.
ilham alan
He was inspired by Freud and
bu
Jung,
şemanın, yumurta
and
şemasını aslında
this egg-shaped
boş
scheme
durması. Bir bilinç dışı kategorileri vardır.
had a lot of
Bu
subconscious
şemayı biz
categories,
şimdi Kur'an-ı Azimüşşan üzerinden doldurduk.
and we filled the scheme through the content of Holy Quran. Let's start with the Surah Al-Tin.
Lekat halaknal ve tini ve zeytuni ve turi sinine ve hazel beledel emin. Lekat halaknal insane fi ahseni takvim. Biz insanı en
We
güzel
created
şekilde
the
yarattık.
human in the best possible
Bakın bu
form.
insanı en güzel şekilde yarattı
So,
dediğimiz andan
Once we
itibaren
say that,
Freud'un bize anlattığı Batı psikolojisindeki o insanın sefaleti, o
we
buzdağının alt
we
tarafındaki
have a
doğu
different
olmadığını
perspective from
Fehlerden esinlenerek
Freud,
insanın aslı
who has
kötü,
an
hayır,
understanding
insan
and
aslı güzel. Peki bu güzellik
who has a
nedir?
take on human as an iceberg, and the essence of human is evil for him. And
Nasıl açacağım bunu? Eyvallah. Şu gördüğünüz üst taraftaki yer
so in the upper side here,
ruh, can dediğimiz
is the
içimizdeki
soul.
Hazreti insan potansiyelidir.
It is basically the
Batı
potential for the
psikolojisi
holy
bunu real
human.
self, essential
The
self.
Western psychology calls this as real self or essential
Gördüğünüz
self.
şuradaki, Kur'an-ı Kerim ayeti kerimeleri üzerinden gidersek bu
If we go through
nedir?
the
Bu
verses of
özelliğimiz bir kere
Quran,
her
we
insan
can say
Rabbül
that
Alemin ruhu ile ve nefahtuhu min ruhihi ruhu ile müşerref olmuştur.
we are honored
Demek ki biz
by
Rabbimizin
the
ruhunu taşıyoruz. Bu ne demek biliyor
the
musunuz?
spirit of our
Bu çok derin bir
Creator.
hakikat.
It is a very deep truth. We're not from this
biz
earth.
uzaylı da değiliz.
We're not
Biz ondan
aliens
ötesinde bir
either.
varlığız.
We are
Bir.
creatures
İki,
far beyond
birinci
the
insan
two.
hakikati.
So that
İkinci
is the
insan
first
hakikati
truth
nedir?
on
Ben
humanity.
sizi
The
dünyada
second one
hafife
is
kıldım.
that
Benim yerime size yetki
the
verdim
Creator
dünyada
made
şeyler
us
yapmak.
caliphs on the earth, so He authorized us to do
Üçüncü
things.
özelliğimiz
And
nedir?
how about the third
Kainatın
one?
bütün yapısal kodlarını size öğrettim diyor.
He taught all the structural
Birazdan
codes
yapısal
of
kodların
the
meslek
universe.
üzerindeki tesirini
These structural
gördüğümüz zaman çok
codes
ilginç şeylerle
have
karşılaşacağız.
a certain influence on
Esma-ül
sexuality
Hüsna
as well.
dediğimiz
So the holy names of Allah, it's not limited to 99. It is unbounded, unlimited in number. In Hadith, 99 is a kind of recommended.
Biliyor musunuz? O yönümüzün cinsiyeti yoktur.
So
Cinselliği yoktur.
that dimension of our existence has no sexuality, but once we are sent to the world,
Burada sabitlendikten
we
sonra
start
nefs-i emmare
a sexuality.
Şimdi buraya geldik. Burası nefs-i
So
emmare.
we are on the earth now, and we are talking about nefsul emmara,
Burayı da
and
farklı varoluş ontolojik
from an ontological perspective, we can see that as different levels of existence. In İnşikak Surah,
ben sizi tabaka tabaka yarattım.
Allah says, I created you layer by layer.
Burası tehlikeli bir yerdir.
So this is a dangerous point. Why?
O bir hadis-i şerifte buyurulur der.
Because in a hadith,
En büyük düşmanın iki yönün arasında bulunan
the biggest enemy of you are yourself, nafsul ammara, between your right and left. Under this point, we have our internal hell, the darkness inside us. You wouldn't have that, of course, but all the negativities are here in our internal hell. We have some shadows in this part.
Örneği nasıl verebiliriz size? Ben maçlara gittiğim zaman
When I go
maçları izlemem.
to games, for example, I don't watch the game, but I watch the audience. You know, you can see very interesting things at those sports games. Or when you go when you are stuck in a traffic, for example, you have different observations. So we have a sub-field like that, and there's this danger to fall down into this field. And that happens if we break the rules. And on the other side, there's the upward-looking side of human. It is not dark, it is full of light, and that is the nature of the nefs. So who understood that in the Western psychology?
S.G. Jung.
S.G. Jung.
İşte Brukosli Hastanesi'ndeki S.G. Jung ilginç bir psikiyatr.
He's an interesting psychiatrist, and he did something nobody else did. He took the risk of going crazy. He went down into his own internal hell. And this is the red book that he put together, and he didn't want this book to be published, and his family broadcasted the book after he passed away, and this book has a lot of diagrams. Let's take a look into how he portrays this. This is his own drawings, by the way. This is about a single person. There's a lit up area, and we have different personalities that turned our faces to this lit up area, but in the depths of this lit up area we have those monstrous personalities. So this is why Quran says, refers to this existence as the dead that never tasted life. Or Quran refers to these personalities as those who are lower than animals. So let's get back to the main scheme. This part here, Nafsul Ammara, this part is very important. In this part, let's say we didn't violate the divine rules, we didn't fall down into our inner hell. So what happens if we stay at Nafs al-Ammara in the Velad, Surah al-Velad in Quran? There's a concept of kebed. Ismail Hakkı Bursevi describes this kebet as something that has a potential to develop and overflows its container. So, you know, once you feel that you want to explode, you are referring to a kebed. Let's get back to the previous one.
Şu gördüğümüz yerdeki bu kebet halini
Here,
nasıl anlayalım?
how do we understand
Eğer
the
orada
state of
kalırsak
kebed?
mesela filozoflar üzerinden anlayalım.
If we stay
Batılı
at that
filozoflar
point,
üzerinden anlayalım.
let's look into this issue from the Western philosophy. Albert Camus looks into the world and says that the
Eğer
world
burada
is
kalırsak
absurd.
dünya saçma olur.
If we stay at that point, the world remains absurd. Jean-Paul
İnsan
Sartre
denizin üzerinde
says
uçmuş bir sinek gibidir.
human is
Sadece
a fly that
ayaklarını
fell
çırpar
down
üzerinde kalır,
on the
vakti
surface of the
saatinde gelir,
sea,
olur giderler.
and we are bound to drown when the time
Hassas
comes.
birisidir ve ölüme götüren
Soren
hastalıkları kitabı var.
Kierkegaard, a
Kierkegaard, o kitapta,
Danish philosopher, a
"Ben
delicate
varoluş
soul really,
sıçramasını yapamadım."
he says
Existential
he didn't have the existential leap. He couldn't accomplish that in his lifetime.
resmi gösterebiliriz.
We can have that visual now.
Şuradan çıkamadım. Burası nefse.
He basically says that I failed to break free from
Çıkma nedir biliyor musun?
this place. You know, what is breaking free from this place?
Okunurken müezzinin felah demesi, felah yarıp geçme demektir.
You know, in the call for prayers every day, in the azan, there is the concept of falah. Falah is basically breaking free and going through.
Devam edersek,
So if we continue from the Surah Al-Balad,
şurayı gösterelim. Burada dedik takılıp kaldık.
let's say we got stuck at this point, and this creates a lot of ontological anxiety, depression. So we have to break free and go through from that moment. We have to elevate ourselves. In Surah Al-Balad, there is a saying, do you know what this steep road is?
Altruist bir varoluş tarzı sergilemek.
To break free from that point, you're going to have to be an altruistic person. That takes us back to the concept of infaq in Arabic. So, you know, the psychology has two major issues. We don't know what psyche is, and the second problem is that there is a post-Jungian person.
Bizler 200 senedir varız. Ama 200 senedir insan psikolojisi daha kötüye doğru.
He says we exist for 200 years, and for 200 years human psychology is deteriorating because we forgot the beautiful morality and we don't know how to give away. So I did group therapies with Yalom, and I have did the family sequencing, and you know, I've been appreciated by a lot of people, but in the long term, let's say in 1900s we had 2% as depression rates, and today it is 40%, especially for you among ladies. It is very prevalent. We're going to look into why women have more depression later, but to elevate ourselves in the structure, giving, donating is very important. This is why I'm trying to convince people that all the therapy institutions should work with a charity organization. My dear brother Ibrahim is going to like this idea. I think, you know, we do every hocus pocus here, abracadabra. We give medicine to people, and at the same time we get involved in a project in Africa. You know, if we want to relax, that is an obligation. It's not a luxury. It's not something optional. You know, for all these years you have been studying the neft psychology. What did you understand? Okay. Without the morality to give away and donate, we cannot really provide comfort for ourselves. So let's say we elevated ourselves, and at a point we realize that we feel comfort, we feel relaxed.
Gönüle yaklaştık, gönüle.
We get together, we get close to gönül. That is a Turkish concept. Hakim Kırmızı uses the concept of I. You know, I is basically a metaphor for gönül. And the colorful part is the heart, and the whole is called fuad, and the light comes out of that.
Bazen gençler anlasın diye o manevi kalbimizi.
Sometimes for the young people to understand, I identify our metaphorical heart as Stargate. You know, we have a Stargate. 156 verses in Quran basically warns against rusting and stigmatizing this part of our body. So from that point, we realize that, you know, we make, you know, according to what we know, we make decisions by a rational calculation, by our minds, basically. But the primary place for processing information is this metaphorical heart. And once we put it together with the light of Quran, the hikmah comes out. So primary processing center is not the mind, it is the heart. Even Jung understood that, and he's talking to a shaman in South America. Shaman is trying to tell something, and Jung fails to understand. And shaman tells him that you are thinking with your mind, you should think with your heart. I'm trying to talk you through the concept of hikmah. Between we are setting our priorities, and if we fail to intervene in these processes with our heart, with our metaphorical heart, we make mistakes. The second function of the metaphorical heart is the primary center for pleasure. You know, it's not actually the brain stem, it is the heart. Once we have pleasure, there is a secretion of dopamine. Let's say we have a holiday, we're eating, drinking, we're having a lot of fun, and dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin are being secreted. Amino acids are being secreted. So, let's say I went to Club Med for holiday, for vacation. I'm enjoying my time. So, just tell me now, if you go to Africa, risking a lot of diseases and bringing service to other people, so what kind of pleasure can you get from a process like that? So that pleasure is basically takes place in the primary human pleasure center. That is the pleasure that we have in our heart. And it changes everything. It changes our perspective on pathology. Let's say, if I don't do things like that, my pathology increases. So, in very brief, this is what the metaphorical heart is. Now, let's get into the issue of sexual identity and sexuality. What did we say at the beginning? We created the humans in the best possible form. And the soul, the spirit here goes down all these levels, and it fixates at that point. There is no sexuality at this point, we said. But here we have. To understand that, we're going to have to look into our fine structure, delicate structure. What should we
kainatın
understand?
yaratılış kodlarını anlamamız.
We have to understand the creation code of the universe.
Esma-ül Hüsna'yı anlamamız lazım.
We're going to have to
Bu
understand
Esma-ül
the
Hüsna,
Asma'ul
ikili
Husna,
yapıda
the beautiful
özellikle
names of
başka
Allah,
detayları
and
var.
in a binary
Ama ikili
structure,
yapıda celal ve cemal
we're going to have to
isimleri
look
var.
into the names of majesty and
Celal ve
beauty.
cemal isimleri,
Jalal and Jamal.
o hadis-i şeriften gidersem, mesela
If
cemal
we
isimleri,
go through that hadith
Rahman,
again,
Rahim,
the names of
Hafız, Müheymin,
Jalal, Rahman,
Bari,
Rahim, Vedud, Muheymin, Bari,
Halik,
Halik,
Sabur, En-Nur,
Sabur, and
isimler
Nur.
cemal isimleri.
Those
Bu
are the
isimler
names of
siz hanımefendiler,
Jamal.
mesela Vedud, aşk ile
So,
seven, Bais,
Vedud, for example, loving with a real love.
Vekil, yavrularını
Vekil, for
kendi
example.
işinden üstün tutan, Veli, gerçek dost,
Veli, the real friend, true friend.
yok gibi olandan yaratan, Muid, o
Muid.
sonra aslına iade eden, Tevvab, affeden,
Tevvab,
Rauf, çok
forgiver,
merhametli,
Rauf,
Cami,
compassionate.
bir araya getirip, bakın bu
A Jami, who brings together. So the names of beauty do exist in your persona. I'm talking about the woman here. So the woman reflects more names of Jamal. You would have creativity, sensitivity, harmony, delicacy, forgiveness, sacrifice, patience, and
Celal isimleri nedir?
how about the names of Jalal, the names of majesty?
Bak çok ilginç. Bu hanımefendilerin bu zenginliğine kıyasla Celal isimleri
Compared to the richness of the ladies here, we have Jalal, Jabbar, Muntakim. You know, we have limited these names to 7 or 8 names.
Bir şema üzerinden.
So from an ancient scheme,
Yin-yang şeması üzerinden.
you know, the scheme of yin and yang,
cinsiyet için zat-ı hallerinize arz etmeye çalışacağım.
I'm going to talk about what it means from that perspective.
Evet, bu gördüğünüz
This
resimleri iyi
is
görüyorsunuz.
what do you see
Sağ
in
taraf
this
nedir?
visual on the right side?
Efendim sizlersiniz.
We have
siz
Jamal,
hanımefendiler.
you
Siz bir
ladies
çiçek
on the right
bahçesi
side.
gibisiniz.
You're like
Ve
a
bu çiçek bahçesine
flora
bu
now.
çiçek
You're
bahçesinin
like a garden
ortasında
of
da bir
flowers,
cemal çekirdeği
and in
var.
the middle
Ya bu
there
Jung'un
is the
animus ve
seed
animası,
of
işte şu
Jamal,
belki
Jung's animus
bunu
and
Batı psikolojisi
anima.
açısından söylemeye kalkarsak,
I mean,
işte
from
şu
the perspective of Western psychology,
anima.
this is animus, this is
bu da
anima.
nedir? Bu da bize erkekler efendim.
And
Fark var mı
on the
acaba
left side,
erkeklerle hanımefendiler arasında?
The
Ne
men,
görüyoruz?
the
Bakın, monotonluk
male,
görüyoruz.
you see,
Niye-
it's
Niye tebessüm ediyorsunuz
unicolor.
hanımefendiler? Bildiğiniz
It's a
şeyleri
monotonous
söylediği için tebessüm
structure.
ediyorsunuz. Şu da bizim içimizdeki
You are
nedir?
smiling now. I can see
Cemal
that because
çekirdeği.
I'm telling you what you already know.
Eğer
So
bizim içimizdeki
in
bu
the
cemal
middle,
çekirdeği
there is
tekamül
the
etmezse ne
seed
olur?
of
Workaholic dedikleri, işkolik,
Jamal.
burning out
If it
sendromu
doesn't manifest
dediğimiz,
itself, we would be
ölesiye
workaholics, we
çalışan,
would burn out,
yani
you know, we would
var
work to
olmak
death.
yerine sahip
Rather than
olmaya yönelik,
existing,
hükmetmeye yönelik bir
we
varoluş sürdürürüz.
resort to owning. You know, the reason for pollution that we are going through is basically this imbalance between the Jalal and Jamal.
Hanımefendiler gitgide daha
Ladies
çiçekleri soluyor.
Are,
Sizleri tenzih ederim.
you know, the flowers of the female part, well, they're losing their color.
Lütfen.
Jean Twenier
Ben Nesli kitabını okuyun.
has a book called I Generation.
Ne tahmin
An American
ediyorsunuz?
psychologist, by the way, the author
Son
is.
20 senede hanımefendilerin celallenme,
In the last
çiçeklerin
20
solma
years,
oranını ne tahmin ediyorsunuz?
What do you think the rate of losing color
Ben
among
söylemiyorum.
women?
Jean Twenge söylüyor.
It's not me saying that,
%30
it's Jean
oranında
Twenge.
hanımefendiler,
It's about
1970
30%.
ila 1990
Between
arasında
1970 and 1990,
erkekleştiler.
there's a
Peki
masculinization
bunun zararı ne?
that went up to
Bak, bu çok önemli bir
70%.
noktaya
What is
İbn Arabi
the
Hazretleri
harm coming from
Fusus
that?
Hikeminde diyor ki
Ibn
var olan
al-Arabi in Fusus
potansiyel
al-Hikam,
eğer
he says,
değerlendirilmezse
if we do
insan
not
bir sıkıntı,
actualize this
kerb hali.
potential, we go
Yani
through a
bu
state of
isimlerin tecelli etmesi,
kerb.
çıkması lazım. Diyor ki,
So
bu
the
neye benzer
names
biliyor
have to
musun?
manifest themselves.
Nefesini vermeyen bir insanın haline benzer.
It's like
Nefesini
somebody
tutmaya
who
benzer.
inhales but does not
Dolayısıyla
exhale.
hanımefendilerin, bu tabii şu manaya gelmiyor. Hanımefendiler çalışmayacak, hanımefendiler...
Of course, it doesn't mean that
üniversiteye
ladies are
gidecek,
not going to
yanlış
work
anlamayın.
or
Ama
go to
hanımefendilerin bu
universities,
özelliğini anlayarak
but
eğitim sistemimizi,
we should
tarihimizi, her şeyimizi ona
design the
göre
education
ayarlamamız lazım.
system
Rüya.
on an understanding
Biliyorsunuz
like
fakir,
that.
bu nesp psikolojisinde çok
The
rüyalarla
dreams,
çalışıyorduk.
I work
Ne
with
zaman
dreams in
yaptığım
the
konuşmalarda
psychology of the
insanlar biraz
nefs,
teori, biraz fazla kaçırsan
and
insanlar
sometimes
ya,
I basically go into
geldiği
theory a
zaman
bit too
uçuyor
much,
insanlar.
but when a dream comes up,
Fakir bir
people
psikiyatr hanımefendi.
get on listening to me. A psychiatrist lady visited me
Her
one
gittiğim
day,
yerde
and
erkeklerle kavga halindeyim.
she said, I'm fighting with men wherever I go.
Nasıl? İşte efendim iki çocuğun büyüğü, babanın
And,
yar kızı.
she's the older of the two children,
Kardeş gölgede kalmış.
and she overshadowed her younger sibling. She studied medicine and became a psychiatrist, but she is always in a fight with the men, in the world of the men.
Ona bile sevgi
And
veremiyorum.
she has a boy, she cannot even manifest her love
Derken
for
rüyalar gelmeye başladı.
her
Ne
son.
doğuruyor biliyor
And
musunuz
then
rüyalarda?
we started talking about her dreams.
Rüyalarda kız erkek öyle
In the dreams,
karışık semboller geliyor.
we have male and
Kız
female
doğuruyor. Ama
symbols.
kızın affedersiniz, erkek
She
cinsel organı var.
delivered a baby girl, but the baby girl had the male sexual organ. So,
Anima yapılanması dediğimiz bizim psikolojide. Anima,
so this is something that we
cemal
call anima
yapılanması.
in the
Yani
psychology.
rüya
So
bir şekilde onun içinde o bastırılmış,
this dream
demek istemiyorum ki doğru değil,
is
bastırılmış o çiçek bahçesinin tekrardan çiçek açmasını istiyor.
the manifestation
Üç, beş rüya
of
falan derken bir gün
the oppressed flower garden, let's say.
rüya gördüm dedi.
And one day she came to me and she had a dream and she gave birth to
Ama
a
dedim, yok korkma.
baby girl
Dedi, arka
in her
kısmında şurasında
dreams.
dedi, bir şey kalmış. Ama o da dedi göbek bağı gibi.
That was something
O da
just
dedi,
in her backside,
hanımefendi dedi,
but
Cemal Yanmaz
it wasn't something unusual. It would fall
Ya,
off.
kavga bitti erkek
So,
dünyasıyla. Yine çalışıyor, yine iş yerlerinde.
She's still working. She's
Hatta
going to
çocuğun
workplaces,
erkek çocuğuna bile daha
and
fazla
the fight that she
sevgi
had
verebilir
is
hale
over, and she can give more love to her
Gelelim biz erkeklere.
son. Let's talk about men
Bir
now.
erkeğin, bakın fıtri olarak, fıtrattan gelen
By
incelik var, olabilir erkeklerde.
nature, we
bazı
can
erkeklerin
have
cemal
a
potansiyeli
delicacy. We can have more potential for Jamal,
yine böyle
for
oluyor.
men. We can
arkadaşım
have
İkizler görüyor. Bu ikizler
men like that. Let me talk to you.
göbeklerinden değil de
Let me tell you another
kalplerinden birbirleriyle
dream.
bağlı.
A friend of mine sees twins in his
İkizlerin bir tanesi
dream,
kız,
and they're
bir
connected to
tanesi
each other
erkek.
from their hearts. I mean, biologically
Fakat
connected to
kız
each
daha
other
büyük.
from their hearts. One of them is
Bunları birbirinden ayırmam lazım
a
diyor.
girl, the other one is
Orada
a
bir doktor
boy.
geliyor,
The girl is
doktor
older,
konuşuyor,
and
bunları ayırırız diyor.
she wants to separate them. And the doctor, there's a doctor. He says, "Okay, I can separate them," and he does with a small surgical intervention. And he starts dealing with the boy, and after a while, somebody comes and tells him that the girl is about to die.
Sonra anladın mı dedim.
And I said, "Did you understand?
Bunu şöyle anlayın.
This is the Jamal potential for a man. This is a successful man, by the way, an academic, the boss of a CEO, but they are bored to death." People come to me like that. So,
ona ne bileyim bir teşvik ederse
if
tekrardan gelir.
a potential for Jamal is awakened, people like that could come back to life.
Bu arkadaşım büyük bir şirketin patronuydu.
That friend of mine was the boss of a big company, and he passed her position down to his children, and now he is working with wood.
Şimdi gelelim tabii esas mevzumuza.
He's doing wood carving, and
Neyi anladık? Demek ki cinsiyet
The real issue here is that sexuality and sexual orientation is about the manifestation of Jalal and Jamal. How about the homosexual relationship?
Celal, yani bir erkek, bir erkekle
A man, when a man gets together and unifies with another man, what you see here,
arkadaşlar burada çok ince bir hakikati görüyorsunuz.
you see a fine truth there.
Frankçesini söylememiz gerekirse burada bir mutual interpenetrational
We have a mutual interpenetrational,
mutual creational
interpenetrational equilibrium that
Yani
is
karşılıklı
the frame of that concept.
yaratılıştan gelen
So
bir iç
it is
içe
mutual
geçmişlik
and
var.
it is an
Bunun adı nedir biliyor
interpenetration.
musunuz? Ve Celal ve Cemal'in birleşmesinin
That is,
oluşturduğu bu nedir?
you know, this is the unification of Jalal and Jamal. It is the
Celal ve
state
Cemal
of
birleştiği
Kamal.
zaman kemal hali çıkar.
Kamal
Tevhiddir,
is
birliktir.
the unity.
Şu çocuklar
These children,
cinsel ilişkiye girdikleri zaman
once they have
erkekler
sexual relationships,
emin olun
men
bedenlerini
to men,
istemiyorlar.
they don't want
Biraz
their
evvel zaten
buddies.
halinlerinize canı gösterdim. Canına ulaşmak istiyor.
They
Canına.
want to reach out to the essence
canına
of the other
ulaşamazsın.
person.
İki can
But
bir
if they
olamazsa,
fail to do that, if the two souls
ahengi,
cannot
dengeyi
get
bozdukları
together,
için
as
inanılmaz
they
bir
upset the
tevhid
balance and
açlığı
harmony,
başlıyor.
they would have an
Zürih'te
unbelievable
üniversite
starvation for unity, an
Peki,
unbelievable
hatırlıyorum
thirst. In Zurich, I was in the clinic one day, and an actor came to me,
Çok mu sizin canınızı yaktılar? Evet.
and I asked, he was a homosexual,
500'ün üzerinde olmuş.
have you been hurt a lot? And I asked, how many intercourses did you have? And he said about above 500. And how can that be? I said, if you go to public bathrooms every night, you can do have more than 500 intercourses. And I looked into him with awe, and
Son çıkan kitabı lütfen okuyun.
please do read the last book, by the way,
Tehlikeleri.
the health hazards of homosexuality. So, 500, 1,000, 1,500 intercourses. It's not limited to that. There are a lot of immoral practices that follow that.
Yanlış tevhid aşığı bu çocuklar.
These children are in love. They are in love with Tawhid. They want to exercise and enjoy unity. This is why they don't get satisfied. And we have to understand that very well, because once you upset the unity, a starvation, a thirst starts, and a lot of diseases follow that, as you know.
İlginç bir şey oldu. Bana gelen bir eşcinsel hastam
Something interesting happened. You know, a homosexual patient of mine saw a dream. He was creating a yin and yang scheme out of mosaic in his dream. You know, in psychotherapy, the works through animus and anima. They are very effective in psychotherapy, by the way. For example, in many cases of homosexuality, you know, female principles like being awakened, like anima awakening, well, that happens in psychotherapeutic processes. The tragedy that we see is about upsetting the unity. This is according to the psychology of nafs. So once Jalal and Jamal unifies,
hepimizin hayatında mesela bir mürşid-i kamil
in our lives,
celal ve cemal potansiyelini birleştirmiş.
a true guide, Murshid Kamil, means who put together the two, who unify the potentials of Jalal and Jamal, and from that point, what happens? A baby of heart shows up. That is our new persona. I hope Rabbul Alameen gives you the chance of delivering this
o çiçek
baby of
bahçeleri
heart, especially
solmaz. İnşallah bizim çiçek
you ladies
bahçemizde
would not lose your
biraz
colors
daha renklenir,
as
biraz daha
flower
gelişir.
gardens.
Sabrınıza teşekkür ederim.
Thank you very much for your patience.
Evet. Bak 5 dakika daha verdim.
I finished five minutes earlier than I should.
Değerli konuklar,
Distinguished
uzman doktor
guests,
Mustafa Merter hocamıza
We listened
bu
to
güzel,
Dr.
anlamlı,
Mustafa Merter, and I'd
hakikaten
like to
doyurucu
thank him for this
konuşmalarından
beautiful
dolayı
and
çok
satisfying
teşekkür ediyoruz.
speech.
Sağ olsunlar, var
Thank you very
olsunlar.
much, Dr.
Ve
Merter.
şimdi de
Now,
IFTCC'nin rolü uluslararası bir
we're going to
tarzda
have
koordine
Dr.
edilen
Mike
terapi
Davidson,
yasaklanma
and his speech
terapi
is
yasaklarına
entitled
karşı
as
bir
The
direniş
Role
olarak
of
hak ve özgürlükleri
IFTCC,
savunmak
Asserting Rights and
konulu
Freedoms as Pushback
konuşmayı
Against
yapmak
Internationally
üzere Dr.
Coordinated
Mike
Therapy
Davidson'ı
Bans.
alkışlarınızla
I'd like to
huzurlarınıza
invite
davet
Dr.
ediyorum. Buyurun
Davidson
efendim.
to the podium now. Please proceed to the podium, Mr. Davidson.
Honored academics and guests, thank you so much for the privilege this morning of being able to address you and share with you. It's a real honor, and I bring you greetings from those who support me in the International Federation for Therapeutic and Counseling Choice. So my name is Mike Davidson, and somehow in my journey I managed to get a PhD in education. That was a long journey. I mention it because recently in an interview on one of the television channels, my opponents objected to the fact that my doctorate was mentioned, because they felt that I should not have a doctorate and that it would confuse people into thinking that I was a medical doctor. And of course, I'm not a medical doctor. Actually, neither am I a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I am just a man who had to deal with the issue of homosexuality in my life. I was a confused man. I was somebody who longed to be married and to have children. I was also, I believe, a spiritual man, and my Christian faith was important to me. But there was conflict in my life, and that conflict meant that I was unhappy and needed to find resolution and help. And to cut a very long story short, even though I was a married man, this conflict continued within me. That is, a desire to be with another man. The day came when I realized I had to get help. I had tried to get help in the spiritual circles where I was operating, but nobody really knew how to help me. They told me that what I felt was wrong, that it was disordered, but they didn't really give me any solutions about how to deal with that. And so the day came when I made a decision to seek for professional help. And the professional help I sought was helpful. I had a satisfying, healthy relationship with a male therapist who modeled for me the way of interacting with another male that was healthy and respectful, something that I just hadn't learned properly growing up. Well, after some time, I was considerably helped. I could put my shoulders back. I had confidence. I was able to see myself in a new way. And it also gave me a deep passion and a desire to help other men who I knew were struggling in the same way. I'm telling you all of this because this is why I am passionate about the work of the International Federation for Therapeutic and Counseling Choice. I believe we have to protect people's rights and the freedom that men and women need to have to be able to get help in all of our societies. And I regret in the United Kingdom and in much of Western Europe and in the Americas, this right and freedom is under threat. And I'll give you a few illustrations about why that it is under threat, and then I'll talk specifically about the nature of the IFTCC. Well, for example, as my organization, well, let me just explain to you that the International Federation for Therapeutic Choice is one organization, and it is an organization that is, as I will explain, concerned to promote professionalism in our world in this area of helping people with gender confusion and unwanted same-sex attraction. But the organization I founded in Northern Ireland, part of the United Kingdom, is Core Issues Trust. And it's a simple Christian charity. It's registered with the state as a charity. It's not for profit. And what do we seek to do? Well, the same thing. We seek to support men and women who want help for unwanted same-sex attractions. And the IFTCC is something that we support out of Core Issues Trust. We have another project called X Out Loud. And X Out Loud is a project specifically that allows young people the freedom to express their joy and their encouragement because they are finding freedom away from lives around homosexuality and the confusion of transgender. And they are happily coming together and finding support from one another. So we have these three organizations, Core Issues Trust, the IFTCC, and the International Federation for Therapeutic and Counseling Choice. So what are some of the things we do? Well, not very long ago, Core Issues Trust produced a film. It's not a high-budget film, but it was an attempt to tell the UK nation and anybody else who was interested about the journey of those coming out of homosexuality. It listens to the voices of professionals who have an opinion about all of this. And it also listens to the voices of those who are on this journey. And when we completed the film, we thought, well, we'll show it to the public in London. And so we booked a theatre, and we were going to premiere the film in the theatre in Trafalgar Square, central London. And everything went well in planning for that, to the point that everybody signed up, all the seats were taken, and we thought we were going to have a successful premiere. But 3 days before the showing of the film, the LGBT lobby actioned a plan against us, which meant that pressure was brought to bear on the theatre, the cinema, and we were told that we could no longer have our premiere. And so the film became banned in terms of public accessibility to our point of view. And so we had to find a different venue. Well, fortunately for us, The newspapers got a hold of it, the television got a hold of it, the internet got a hold of it, and so we got our film premiered, and people knew about it and knew what our message was all about. So that's the kind of thing we do, because we think it's important to express a point of view that is not very popular in our society. Another thing that happened before I talk a little more about the IFTCC is this. About 7 years ago, we decided to hold a conference, something similar to this. And we asked people we asked people who were struggling in this area, people for whom this is a really important life or death issue. We asked them what we should call it. And some of them, being Christian, had read about the story in the Bible when a leper came to Jesus and said, "Would you heal me?" And in Mark chapter 2 and verse 41, Jesus said, "Of course I will heal you." And here's the point, he reached out and touched the leper. Now, if you know your ancient history, you'll know he was completely countercultural. He touched the leper. He touched somebody who was unclean. And the story is that the leper was healed. And the people were amazed that he had touched this unclean person. And so they said to us, we should call the conference "The Lepers Among Us." And the message was that the people of faith needed to reach out compassionately, needed to reach out to help those who are struggling with this issue of homosexuality and gender confusion. And so that's what we called our conference, "The Lepers Among Us." And we put the date out and we put the promotion out. So what happened? Well, the media immediately said, so you think that the LGBT are lepers. You are saying they are diseased. You are homophobic. You have no compassion. And that's the kind of issue we face. We get criticism that we are not compassionate, that we have no love, that we do not give people the freedom to be themselves. And this is the kind of issue that we face all the time. And so we have developed over the years to the point where we now have the International Federation for Therapeutic and Counseling Choice, which means that we are trying to teach the society or offer the society scientific truth and information around this issue. I'm not sure how to change the slide, but if I could have the next slide, that would be very helpful. I'd like to tell you a little bit more about the organization. Is somebody able to put the slide on for me? It's coming. Thank you. So, those are the two emblems. Could we have the next slide, please? So, what is the role of the IFTCC? Well, essentially, it's about asserting the rights and freedoms as pushback against internationally coordinated therapeutic bans. So we're trying to find ways of pushing back those who want to ban therapeutic choice. So what do? Well, we try to offer high-quality, professional, and discreet support for anyone who is experiencing unwanted same-sex attraction. You see, the problem is we've realized we are never going to persuade the UK's professional mental health bodies that we are correct. They are not listening to us. They are not allowing us to have a different point of view. So in 2015 in Germany, with a group of individuals from, I think, 17 different countries, we decided we wanted to establish the International Federation for Therapeutic and Counseling Choice. We then went about launching it in 2018, after this organization was incorporated in London in 2017. And what we're trying to provide is a worldwide network of skilled practitioners, counselors, and therapists who are interested in this area. And we seek to be research-based and scientifically grounded. We make no apology for the fact that we have personal values and that we have faith in our lives, but we clearly want to be scientific in our approach, and we wish to try to achieve the highest professional standards. Thank you. Next slide. So, what are we aiming to do? Well, we are aiming to create an alternative international professional body, something that is independent of the professional bodies, for example, in the United Kingdom. And the second thing that we want to do is to develop a recognized professional register of practitioners. Why are we doing that? Because we recognize the importance of being accountable. We want to be able to have collegiality with those who are interested in the field that we are interested in, even with those who oppose what we do. We feel it's important to have checks and balances. So we don't want to be an island. We don't want to be divorced. But we're in the situation where the only way we can make ourselves heard is to create an alternative organization. And so we think a recognized professional register of practitioners will be very important in years to come. What that means is we want practitioners to be able to share common values, share ideals, share ways of operating. They may have different approaches, but we are hoping that there would be some consistency in what we are all doing, some values and some ways of approaching things that are clear. So, to simplify, what is it that the IFTCC recognizes? Well, we recognize the created order of male and female. So for us, you know, the Facebook idea of 52 genders doesn't work. We think there are two genders, male and female. We think that the human body is something that is blessed, that there is a sanctity about the human body, that is something precious and something to be looked after. We also believe that marriage between one man and one woman for life is the best way of doing family. And we believe that it is our responsibility as caring citizens to nurture and protect children. And that's basically what we stand for in terms of broad values. Now, we stand for a lot more, but those are the basics that we want to promote. Could I have the next slide, please? So I want to just very briefly talk for a few minutes about the therapy bans that are currently being promoted, certainly throughout the Western world. So I don't know if you are aware, but right now, the United Kingdom government has a consultation process that will last for 6 weeks. And in the consultation process, they are asking questions not about if we should ban what they call conversion therapy, but how we should ban it. Their goal is to criminalize any individual who offers coercive therapy. Now, none of us are offering coercive therapy. But the LGBT lobby is arguing that this is going to provide a loophole. This is going to mean that anybody who offers psychotherapy or counseling is going to be offering it to people who cannot decide because they have been they are the victims of what they call societal homophobia. And therefore they are not able to give consent to counseling because they have lived in a society that is very homophobic. And so in the consultation there is going to be a fight around all of this. Now just a word about conversion therapy. Conversion therapy is a term that was invented by an LGBT activist who is a part of the American Psychological Association. His name is Douglas Haldeman. And in 1993, he coined this term. Excuse me. And the danger is that this term is an imposed term. There is nobody in the United Kingdom who offers conversion therapy. So this is an accusation that is made. And when the government puts forward its consultation, it doesn't use, quotation marks around conversion therapy. It just states that they want to ban conversion therapy. And most of the people in the UK think, well, that's a good idea. Because of who would not want to ban coercive therapies? But I'm afraid the issue is that this is the beginning of a process. I remember, for example, a few years ago when the government said that we should have civil partnerships, allowing LGBT people to come together not in marriage but in civil partnerships. And many people were concerned about this and worried about this, and the government said there's nothing to worry about. We're not talking about marriage. We're talking about civil partnerships in law, a legal contract between two individuals. That's what they said. Excuse me, that's what they said during the time of Tony Blair. But you notice during the time of David Cameron, things changed. And all of a sudden the Conservative government became very pro-LGBT. And so not long after David Cameron came to power, what did we have? Well, we had full marriage between homosexual people. That was then something that was promoted, never voted on. I wasn't asked to vote. The people were given no choice. But Parliament enacted the Equal Marriage Act. They said they would never do it. They did it. And now we're at a point where they say they want to ban conversion therapy. Our worry is this is the first step in banning any point of view that is not in support of the popularization and normalization of homosexuality. None of us are in support of coercive therapies. None of us want to see anybody hurt. All of us want to see people operating in professional ways. But unfortunately, what has happened now is that the government is promoting a ban that we think will be very, very difficult. So, what do the bans oppose? They oppose the idea that sexuality is fluid. They say sexuality is fixed. You're born this way. Now, I hope you can sense the discrepancies. Because correct me if I'm wrong, but there is no professional mental health body in the Western world that I know of that says categorically that people are born gay. None. The science doesn't support it. And yet this government seems to support the idea that sexuality is fixed and cannot change, even though we know our population studies show us that change takes place naturally over the period of a person's life. So therapy bans, in essence, also want to stand against the idea that sexuality is changeable. And certainly that sexuality can change in therapeutic interventions. They don't want to support that. And they also are against the idea that gender is fixed. Next slide, thank you. So what is the situation in terms of therapy bans around the world? Well, I've shared a little about the UK. Excuse me, it's clear that the UK are going to ban so-called conversion therapy, and that it is laying a new foundation in our society. Malta has already banned it. Germany has banned it. Austria has banned it. Norway is in the process of banning it. Parts of Australia have banned it. Ecuador, Brazil, several states in the USA, and most recently New Zealand is going through the same process. Now folks, what concerns me is that it's not only being banned, but it's also being criminalized. In the United Kingdom, they are also concerned to establish means by which anybody who does this practice can be informed upon. So people will be encouraged to inform the authorities if this continues. We're talking about incarceration, jail sentences. We're talking about very high fines if anybody is caught involved in this work of conversion therapy. Now, I wonder if you can hear what I'm trying to say here. None of us call what we do conversion therapy. For me, that is a confusion of the concept of conversion, and it's a confusion of the idea of therapy. It's bringing two terms together for a political reason. And I'm very worried because I'm sure I must sound like a politician here. That's not the intention. I wanted to be a therapist. And so when I retired from my work in higher education in the University of Nottingham, the University of Surrey, the University of Ulster, I decided that I wanted to become a therapist. And so I began my training. And I progressed 3 years. I paid all the money for the fees. I did all the therapy. I did the supervision. I went through everything that they told me to do to prepare. But the day came when the statement was made in 2014 that if anybody tries to help another person change their sexual orientation, another word in inverted commas, thank you. The day came when they said if anybody was involved in doing that, they were committing an ethical offense and should be put out of the professional body. And I was a trainee. So I went to my trainers and I said, this is a problem because I have a conscientious objection to this idea that homosexuality is unchangeable. Because it changed for me. It changed enough. It changed enough to give me my dignity back. It changed enough to give me self-confidence. It changed enough for me to be able to have a satisfying, healthy marriage and to have 2 children and to bring the children up in the way that I wanted. Surely that is evidence of something that is worthwhile. But they shook their head and they said, you cannot belong to the British Psychodrama Association if you hold those views. And so it was. Actually, I was in a BBC studio talking about the lepers among us, and people were accusing my organization of being unhelpful and being homophobic, another word in inverted commas, and of being unkind and unloving. And they then said to me, and which professional body do you belong to? So I told them. And before I left the studio, I got an email on my phone to say that I was suspended because of my viewpoint. A week later, I was removed from the register. A year later, having gone through an appeal, it was finalized that I should be put out of the organization as a trainee and not allowed to complete my qualification. What had I done wrong? Had I hurt any student or any of my clients which I was seeing as a trainee? No, there was no problem. There was no ethical issue with the way I was dealing with clients. Had I failed any of the examinations? No, I had done well enough. Was there anything against me? Well, only one thing, and that is that I hold a different point of view about homosexuality. And it was clear when the paper came back with the result of the appeal, because the appeal said that I could be restored if I consistently desist and change my views around homosexuality. Then I can continue. So what we have, in my opinion, is viewpoint discrimination. You know, I had sent a document to them explaining my understanding of the literature. I had cited all the references I knew to cite. I had argued from a certain point of view that it's healthy and good to engage with people who struggle in this area, and that in doing so, very often changes do take place. I did all of that work, 40 pages of it. Well, they did send me a letter to say thank you very much for the document. But you know, they didn't write back and say, well, your methodology is wrong, you have missed all of these quotations, you have misunderstood the research. There was nothing. It was just thank you very much and goodbye. So that's why I fight. That's why I am passionate about what we are doing here. And that's why I feel that the work to ban therapeutic choice, the initiative to undo the freedom that counselors should have to be able to speak to their clients around this is something that we need to fight for. All right, I will just progress a little further and talk for a few minutes about the 4 strategic interests of the IFTCC. And this is what we are doing. How do I spend my time? Well, speaking to the New Zealand government. And you know, on the 22nd of August this year, when I was able to speak to the New Zealand Justice Committee with my colleague and friend, Dr. Laura Haynes from the USA, another IFTCC member, I was able to say to that committee, today is my wedding anniversary. And I've been married for 42 years. And the reason why I'm still married today, and the reason why I can celebrate that fact, is because I got help from professionals and from people who cared about what mattered to me and wanted to move with me in the direction that I wanted to go and were prepared to listen to me. And they said, well, thank you very much for sharing that. And we were billed for 10 minutes, Laura and I, to speak to this committee, but they gave us 25 minutes. So I thought that was a real victory, and that was a real opportunity that we were given. That's the kind of thing we will do. Very shortly in the United Kingdom, in the great city of Westminster, opposite the Houses of Parliament, we will hold an event that will bring 5 of the best known researchers in the world who support our position into London, and we will offer support to those who want to respond to the government's consultation. It will be a live event. If you're interested, you can share and listen to what these experts are saying, arguing that the UK government has not done its homework in terms of the science that surrounds this area. So we do international advocacy initiatives in an attempt to oppose these bans. Secondly, we try to bring about regional accreditation. So in other words, we try to find opportunities where people can be accredited on the IFTCC's register of professional providers. So that's an ongoing work, and it's a difficult work because professionals don't want to do anything that will jeopardize their licensing in the professional body that they belong to. But we live in hope that eventually people will break ranks and will join an alternative movement and go in a new direction. So that's the second thing, looking for regional accreditation among professionals who will stand for this direction. The third thing we are trying to do is to develop a shared curriculum and training opportunities for people to be involved in. We call it the Preferred Provider Program. It's something that was started by our American colleagues, and we've come on board and we are working with them and using their expertise and we plan to provide a curriculum for people who are already trained in different modalities, who want just a bit more information to be able to work in this area. So that's the third thing that we are doing. We are using curriculum experts to try to develop a curriculum, and then once we've developed it, we will ask for input from different national bodies to make sure that it is aligned to national needs in different countries. Why? Because we want to be on the same page, because we want to be accountable, because we want to be professional, and because we want to show ourselves not as people who just are determined to go in their own direction, but because we have an understanding that is worth listening to, that can be researched, and we believe has substance in. And finally, well, we can't all wait for a great conference such as this one. They're expensive to run. They're difficult to manage in times of the pandemic that we are experiencing. So what are we going to do? Well, we're doing local broadcasts. We are broadcasting live. We are coming together, bringing guests from different nations, experts from different fields, and we are delivering things online in the hope that our perspective will grow and that there will be support for the work that we do. So, I'm almost through. Last slide. What are the ethical conditions under which it should be lawful to seek professional help and spiritual guidance in any free society? These are our opinions. We'd love to have feedback and to be helped to improve this, but this is where we are at the moment. We say that it's not only disorder. If somebody feels that there's something broken or inadequate within them, that's not the only reason to seek help. If a person is dissatisfied with their experiences, if they're unhappy and unfulfilled, we think that that's enough those are the grounds sufficient for that individual to be seeking professional help. The UK government wants to make it very, very difficult for anybody to go in that direction if they choose to move away from homosexuality. The problem is if a person says he's been harmed by a therapist, that's what seems to take precedent. So anybody who wants to make an issue can make an issue if he disagrees with a therapist. And now in the UK, it looks as though there will be dire consequences for doing that. Secondly, the second good reason to be seeking help, we think, is when a person has experienced sexual abuse and trauma, and we think that this is an ethical basis on which to seek counseling. If people have had trauma in their lives, if there's been sexual abuse of any sort, if they find that their tendencies are towards homosexuality and they can link it to experience in their lives, we think that that's a good reason for them to be allowed to explore their sexuality. Thirdly, we think if a man or a woman is finding it difficult to live their marriage out successfully, and it's because of what has come in from homosexuality or from lesbianism, we think that that is sufficient reason for them to seek counseling and help. We don't think that any state or any government should be allowed to interfere with that. And finally, we think that because the research literature points consistently to those who over time have moved away from homosexual living and have detransitioned from transgender, that's enough of a legitimate reason to seek counseling and help. So, in closing, ladies and gentlemen, let me just mention this. I am concerned as I hear your president spoke about the use of language. I am concerned about how Western culture has absorbed such things as sexual orientation. I'm just sharing where we are many of us are in the United Kingdom at the moment. We worry about this uncritical reception of a term like orientation. This is your homosexual orientation. Why do we worry? Because it sounds like it's fixed, that it's unchangeable, that you're born with it. So it's a term we don't use very much now. We prefer to speak about sexual patterning. And if a person's sexual patterning is towards homosexuality, we think that's more consistent with the idea that that can be modified if that's that person's desire. But if I speak about my sexual orientation, well, for many of us, that's problematic. Another term that we have problems with is this idea of homophobia. Because this is a word that was invented and imposed and introduced into the Anglo-Saxon world by LGBT activists. It's another word that we take uncritically on, and we talk about homophobia. What's wrong with prejudice? Prejudice against women, prejudice against foreigners, prejudice against people who have other faiths, prejudice against homosexuals, prejudice against lesbians. But you see, homophobia has a specialized term that I'm afraid is causing difficulty in our legal language and the way we operate in the United Kingdom. We could go on. You know, the word gay is another term that is just received critically. So the majority of our young people only ever use the term gay or straight or bi. In other words, they have absorbed the language of the sexual revolution in a way that I think makes it very difficult to be able to be heard in any different way. Well, folks, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. It is a real privilege, and I thank you for that opportunity. I don't know if we have time for questions. If that would be appropriate, I'd be very happy to take any questions, but if now is not the time, or I've overused used too much time, I understand that, so you can just leave me.
Ses gelmediği için şu an çeviriyorum. Soru sormak isteyenler mikrofona sorabilirse biz de çevirebiliriz. So please ask the questions to the microphone so I can translate it.
Thank you very much for your very really feeding talk. I would like to ask you, in your talks I have seen that you speak about Judeo-Christian values. I mean, is it politically wrong to add also Islamic in some place? So Judeo-Christian Islamic values, I don't know. What's the atmosphere in Britain?
Well, I've no doubt that Islamic values share the same thing. And I have been privileged to have many Muslim folk come in my direction. And there are perhaps many areas that we don't agree with, but there are many areas that we do agree with. And one of them is the sacredness of the human body, the importance of marriage, and all of the values that I've spoken about. So I'm sure there are great similarities and commonalities, and we're thankful for those who share the same values. But we do not hear very much from Muslims in Britain on sexuality. Now, I am in contact with a group that exists, and they come together, and they've started recently over the last 2 or 3 years. But we're not hearing anybody standing up publicly and arguing in the same way. So it's an area we want to grow in.
Can I just add something? Recently I received a phone call from a friend of mine from UK. He proposed me to bring 50 homosexuals who want treatment, but because it is banned in UK, so can we do it in Turkey? And he asked me to find a place, a remote hotel or something. So there might be a lot of cooperation and collaboration with your institution in future.
And it's very important what you've just said, because that's exactly what the government intends to ban. So if anybody wants to help people leave Britain to get help in another country, that is a criminal offense. So your friend would be criminalized if he did that. I didn't mention that. Perhaps you could just move the slide on. What we did was we took 44 stories from 22 different countries. The books are here if anybody would like a book. We printed the book and we shared the stories of 44 people who've come out of transgender and homosexuality, and we've given it to every single parliamentarian in Britain, 1,793. The House of Lords, the House of Commons in Westminster, the government in Stormont, Northern Ireland, the government of Wales, and the government of Scotland. Every single politician has had this book. And all this book is saying is, we exist. We are a part of the population, and we believe that we need to be protected. And I'm sure there are many Muslim people who could testify in a similar way. But we're not hearing their voices. And I understand it when they say, I can't show my face. It's too shaming. But you see, I know people will think it's easy in Britain to say these things. It isn't. You know, I said what I said, and it has cost me my professional career. I cannot continue because I said what I said. These young voices, it is not without cost that they say what they say. But it's something that has to develop. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Mr. Mike, bu mücadeleniz için sizi tebrik ediyorum. Başarılar diliyorum.
Congratulate you for your fight and wish you luck.
Siz de biliyorsunuz İslam
As you know, Islam
konuda çok hassas ve
is
karşı
very delicate and
temsil eden
opposed to this idea,
her fırsatta
and our religious affairs is always declaring that they are opposed to homosexuality and it's a sin, and we feel their support with us. But I would like to ask, what does the church think about it, or Catholic Church or Protestant Church? Do you get any support from them? Christian faith, how do they see this? What's their viewpoint on this?
Well, this is how I would answer your question. It's like the Trojan horse. There are people who have infiltrated the church. I would say there are probably people who will infiltrate the Islamic faith, and they will tell us that they are Christian and they are gay. And we will say, but how can those two things fit? They don't fit. They don't work together. Yes, you have homosexual issues, I understand that. But to take on the label gay, to identify gay and Christian, for us is a problem. I would think it's probably the same for yourselves. So, what is happening? Well, the church is divided. So the Church of England said, no, we are never going to support gay marriage. Well, wait a minute. Let's see. So the state church may well go in that. The Methodist Church recently agreed to allow same-sex marriage. Now, from a Christian point of view, to think of the Methodist Church doing that is unthinkable. It's just unthinkable. So, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I'm saying the church is divided. Number one, the church is afraid. The church likes to conform. Everybody wears a mask. If they're told not to sing, they don't sing. If they're told not to go to a meeting, they won't go. Everybody conforms. Nobody wants to be countercultural. Now, there are many exceptions, many exceptions, but that is a problem, that the church likes to conform. And the church doesn't want to put its head up and stand against these things. Now, who am I? I am just one man. I can't generalize about the church. It wouldn't be right. But my fear is those two things, that the church wants to conform and the church is divided. It's a problem. I'm just being honest with you. And we have to deal with that. So there are some churches who will have nothing to do with us. They say change is not possible. They say a man can be celibate, and I'm saying celibate. But hang on, celibacy in Christian tradition is when a man and a woman refrain from coming together. And it's a choice. But how can you talk about a homosexual man being celibate when he has no desire for a woman? I don't know if you can hear what's happening with the language there, but what seems to be happening is the word celibacy in the church is kind of like code for Christian-born gay. He says he's a celibate gay. What that's saying is he can't change. He's just, he's just celibate. So there's no hope other than to repress his sexuality. We think that's a problem. We think that is not a good enough answer. If you give children the choice to be celibate or gay, that is not enough of an answer. You need to be able to help them to know where they can get help if they want it, so that through appropriate counseling and psychotherapy, it can change. Does that address your question at all?
Mr. Davidson, hoş geldiniz.
Welcome.
Sorry.
Adım Sami Yılmaz.
My name is Sami Yılmaz.
İstanbul Aile Vakfı adına
I
buradayım.
am here on behalf of
Aile
Istanbul
Başkanı adına
Family
konuşuyorum.
Foundation, on behalf of the chairman.
Sunumunuz çok kısa bir zamanda olmasına
Your
rağmen çok
presentation
istifade ettim.
is very fruitful for me,
Ve aynı gözlükle baktığımızı
and
gördük
I
olaylara.
believe that
Bu
we
açıdan
see
sevindirici,
everything in the
kendine
same
almak.
way, in the same
Ben
window.
size şöyle bir soru sormak
I would
istiyorum.
like to ask you this.
Gördüğümüz kadarıyla sizin
As we
eğitiminize
can see,
müdahale ediliyor.
You have been
Her bir
oppressed,
köşesinde
and every corner of the world you are fighting on this field.
her devletin kanunlarına müdahale edebiliyorlar. Sosyal
And this lobby you
mecralarda
mentioned,
mücadeleleri
they
var.
can oppress
İktisadi
the
sahada
states, the
var.
countries, the
Ve
legal
aklınıza
system.
gelecek her
They are
bir sahada
on
mücadele
every
ediyor.
field, on media, everywhere.
Böyle bir grup
This kind of group,
finansal kaynaklarıyla
with their
kimlerdir
financial aid.
ülkelerin,
So,
bu kadar kanunlarına dahi müdahale
what do you
edebilen,
think,
her bir
who this
sahaya
group is
girebilen,
that
güçlü
can
bir grup olduğu
affect
belli.
the legal
Ama bunlar
systems of the
kimlerdir?
countries?
Siz
Who are they?
onda bir,
What do you think
fikrinizi
who they
alabilir
are?
miyim?
Can I get your opinion?
It's a very important question. Who are the people who can stand against this? Well, it's the mothers in the home who refuse to allow their children to be taken over by education teaching that is false and hurtful. It's fathers being fathers who stand up for rights and freedom and who will protect the families. It's religious NGOs or NGOs of any sort, socially conservative people who can speak clearly and argue and who are not afraid to meet with politicians. The problem we face in the United Kingdom often with the church is, the church just wants to sing, it wants to preach, and the government is quite happy for the church to preach and sing and do all of those things as long as they don't put their feet on the pavement or they don't get involved in politics or they don't get involved in any national debate. So, where are the religious leaders who stand up and say, so far and no further? We love you. You are welcome to come here. We see you as a human being just as we are. But we don't want you to promote homosexuality in our churches, in our homes, in our mosques, in our synagogues, wherever they are. Where are the religious leaders doing that? So the role of the NGO is vital because it can encourage people who are afraid. We have to stand together. There is no choice. At some point, every man, woman, and child is going to be faced with this issue. So, where are we putting our money? Where are we putting our resources? I feel like I am in a war in the United Kingdom, and I'm pretty sure it's the same with American colleagues. It's outright war on our values. And the only thing I have is my voice, my weak voice, and the little bit of money that we had to put a book together. So we've done small things, but I think that can count. This conference is testimony to that.
Dr. Davidson, may I ask you a question too?
Certainly.
Sure.
Somebody will tell me when time is up.
Yeah, it will be a short question, thank you. When we talked about the words we are usually not allowed to speak out, like sexual orientation or homophobia, I think we lost the privilege of interpretation or using some words a long time ago. And it's definitely political because even the word terrorism is now not the same as we can look up in a dictionary. So first they took us the privilege to interpret some facts and name some facts. So there we got lost. And I think we have to gain the power back and be able to name the things as they are and as they should be. And what do you think as a global community of people who believe in God, who have strong moral values, who have strong family bonds, can do that to gain that power back?
Well, I think it's actually what your president said, don't repeat the language. So when you go on TV and you argue, and they say something about banning conversion therapy, I would say banning therapeutic choice. I think that's a very bad idea. That's against human rights. Every time you use the word conversion therapy, make sure it's in inverted commas. Make sure everybody knows that that's not our term. When the United Nations comes to you, and believe me, they will have visited Turkey and are talking about this to your officials, make sure everybody understands that the special representative is not really a spokesman of the United Nations. He occupies a position in the United Nations, but all of the nations within the United Nations don't necessarily support his agenda. So be very careful when they come and recognize that there are people who are occupying positions who are not necessarily there because they've been democratically elected by everybody in the United Nations. Every time you are accused of homophobia, show the opposite and critique the term. When I grew up, the thing that we valued most of all in our education system was critical thinking, the ability to critique, the ability to discern, to pull things apart. What do we have now in Great Britain? We have monocultures that possess the mental health bodies. You cannot express an alternative point of view. So I don't have the answers. All I know is that it is a work of noble resistance. And it's something that humble mothers and fathers can do. I've seen teenagers do it. I've seen young people in schools push back when a teacher promotes euthanasia or abortion, and has challenged the teacher to allow the other side to be argued. And I think we have to return to that and encourage our young people to realize that their future, their freedom, depends on their ability to resist language that is being imposed upon them. And watch the English language. Watch the material that comes from the Anglo-Saxon world. And do not allow it to take on a currency in your own language. Because these are words with a mission. That's what I'm trying to say. They are words with a mission. They were put out to achieve something. So that, you know, when the religious community is accused of being homophobic, it feels shame, because a religious community wants to be compassionate, it wants to be loving, and all of these things, but it's accused of homophobia. So it overcorrects then by embracing and agreeing instead of, you know, finding the right way of people who are struggling in this area. And the right way is, you know, the worst thing you can do with somebody of faith who struggles from homosexuality is just to say, it's fine who you are. That's the worst thing you can do. And that will completely confuse them. But if you can say to them, look, there are ways of getting help. You can get through this. and you can work with them, that is something that I think can be helpful. Thank you.
Değerli konuklar, Dr. Mike Davis'ine çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Şimdi bir 15 dakikalık bir aramız var, bir kahve.
Now we will take a break for 15 minutes and we will come back later.
Görevli arkadaşlardan rica ediyoruz. Lütfen dışarıdaki misafirlerimizi içeriye davet edebilir misiniz? Çoğunluğu sağladık galiba. Sevgili konuklar, şimdi huzurlarınıza cinsel kimlik bağlamındaki dışa vurum faaliyetlerinin hukuki sınırları
on legal limits of freedom of
konuşmayı
expression
aktarmak
in the
üzere
context
Sayın
of
Doçent Doktor
sexual
Emir Kaya'yı
identity.
alkışlarınızla huzurlarınıza davet ediyorum.
Please
efendim.
welcome Mr. Emir Kaya.
Evet, herkese merhabalar.
Welcome all.
Cuma namazını zora soktuk.
I believe we don't have much time for Juma prayer, but most of us are ladies, so we will have some.
Mevcudun çoğunluğu hanım olduğu için çok sorun yok. Ben de seferi olduğum için benim
So
açımdan sorun yok.
I am Seferi on a travel, and most of us are ladies, so we won't have problem with Juma prayer. I have 15 minutes, so I will keep to that 15 minutes, and there is a mosque nearby, so I hope we can make it.
Şu ışık ayarını yapabiliyor muyuz? Göze vurmasını engelleyebiliyor
So
muyuz?
the light is directly reflecting on my eye. Can we adjust that?
İyi olur. Olmadı. Tam hala
No,
vuruyor ve göze vuruyor.
it still reflects on my eye.
Biraz yönünü değiştirebilirsek.
Can we change its direction?
Evet. Arka taraflar daha aydınlık olabilir sanki.
So maybe you can put more light on the back stage.
Öncelikle Zuhal hocamız başta olmak üzere.
So first of all, I would like to thank all our colleagues.
Biz burada cinsel
First of all, Ms. Zuhal.
tartışmayı öncelikle
So when we discuss the sexual identity, we have to put many aspects of this discussion.
Tıbbi bir mesele mi?
So we have to determine, is it legal, psychological, medical, sociological? So we have to determine the limits of these topics. So when we get all these topics mixed up, we have many problems, and the most important of these problems is, for me, is the legal aspect.
Problemlerden bir tanesi karakterizasyonu yapılmamış tıbbi
So,
açıdan, psikolojik, psikiyatrik
the
açıdan
main problem for us
yapılmamış,
is the
nihai çözüme
non-characterized,
ulaştırılmamış bir meselede
medically or
sanki
psychologically
kesin bir çözüm
non-characterized
varmış, eşcinsellik
topic.
gayet doğal ve normalmiş gibi
So,
varsayılarak hukuki
we can
çözümler ve
assume
politikalar
that
geliştirilmesi. Bu büyük bir problem.
homosexuality is natural or not natural, but we have to determine it legally. So we look at it as a Muslim, so it is very clear for us.
Anormalliktir.
It's an anomaly for us because it's against the nature, because Allah says we created you as duals, as men and women, all the creations.
Olmayı ifade etmeyen kelimelerle
And
ifade ediyor.
as a creator,
Ifade
he
ediyor.
himself
ismiyle ifade ediyor.
describes him
Hocamızın
as
bahsettiği gibi
a
esmalar üzerinden
mono.
çalıştığımızda Cenab-ı Allah kendini çifti olmayan, eşi
So
olmayan,
he says, I have
yaratıcı
no
olarak
equals
yaratılmış her şeyi
or
çifte
no
halinde ifade ediyor.
duals
Kur'an-ı
for
Kerim'le
me.
ilgili çok ayet var.
So there are many ayats
Ve şu
in
an karşı
Quran
karşıya
regarding
olduğumuz
that.
problem de
So the main problem we are facing right now is
kadim felsefelerde
in
var
all
olan
the
kadın
ancient
erkeklik
faiths and religions
kurulu, binary dediğimiz
is a binary,
o
man
varlık
and
yolu,
woman
çiftli ontolojinin
creations,
değiştirilmeye çalışılması,
and
non-binary
they are trying to
dediğimiz
change
çiftliğin
this
dışında bir
and
durumun
create a non-binary
istenmesi ve bunun doğal ve
commentary
normal bir
on
şeymiş
this.
gibi lanse
And
edilmesi.
they are
Bizim
saying
açımızdan
that
çok
this is
net.
a
Biz bu
natural way,
yani
non-binary
dualite
is the
dışı yorumlara
natural way.
tamamen karşıyız.
So
Ama
we are
bir an
against
için
all these
pazarlık ettiğimizi düşünüyorum.
viewpoints.
Bir an için pazarlık
So
ettiğimizi düşünsek
let's
bile,
say
yani
we are
bu sahnenin diğer
discussing with
tarafında
them, bartering
bu
with them.
non-binary, dualist
So
olmayan
when we look at
varlık
it,
yorumu
non-binary
bizim kabul etmemiz
commentary,
mümkün değil ama hadi
we
diyelim
can't
ortada
accept it. But
buluşalım ve
let's say we are
skeptik
bartering
bir
them
noktada
with them
tartışalım.
on
Yani
an
bundan şüpheleniyormuş
agnostic
gibi olalım.
and
Yine
skeptic
buna razı
scene.
olabiliriz belki.
Maybe
Yine buna
we can
hukuki
accept
açıdan,
it
yani
legally,
felsefi ve akide açısından razı olmayız ama
not philosophically,
buna
but
razı
maybe
olabiliriz.
legally we can
Ama şu anki
accept it.
tabloda
But
hukuki açıdan
when
buna
we
bile
look at
razı
it as
olmamasına imkan
legal
verilmiyor.
perspective,
Dr. David
we can't also
sunumunda bahsettiği
confirm them.
Yani birçoğunu ben şahsen
Dr. David has given many examples and I have experienced them.
Eşim bana İngiltere'den bir mektup gönderdi. Böyle bir kart gönderdi.
My wife sent a letter from England and
ayınızı kutlarız diye bir mühür
on the postcard it said we celebrate your Pride Month.
Niye böyle bir
So
logo koysun ki?
I asked her why did you put
Meğerse
such a
orada
logo,
post
and
ofisi
she said post office put every postcard this stamp
Şubat ayı boyunca LGBT
during the month of February.
Posta yazdık dedik.
So we discussed this with UK Post and we said this is against the human rights because my correspondence is private. So you can't put any ideological statement on my private correspondence.
En yüce dindir falan böyle şeylerle yazamazsın. Hiçbir
So
şey
you
yok.
can't
Kaldı ki
put
parasını verip
Islam
aldığınız
is the greatest on the postcard as well. So when they replied to us, they only said we are sorry. We are sorry because you are not modern. So we are sorry for you. We got that response.
İfade özgürlüğü bu alanlarda ifade
So
özgürlüğü
freedom of speech is in this regard is very limited and the world is going very bad place. So a few weeks ago in Sussex University, Professor Caitlin had to resign because of this. She said sex is biological. I am a female, but I can't use the male toilet. So there is no such agreement like that. But because of this, she was oppressed and forced to resign. But the interesting part is, university supported her greatly. And I asked myself, why did they supported this lady? Because the professor was also a lesbian, but the lesbian professor was against the trans community. So when we look at the legal aspect of this, the intellectual dimension of this discussion, so Western intellectual discussion has four periods: pre-modern. So in the pre-modern era, woman is dependent on the man because the church demands that. So modern era, says we don't accept the fate and we use our minds and we conform to the state laws. So woman is not dependent on the man. Woman can also vote, and this is the correct way. So woman lived in the modern era. And then in the feminism waves, in the postmodern era, woman was equal to men. And they said it is not ordinary. The woman can be a truck driver, the man can get pregnant. This is the post-truth era. There are 6 examples of men giving birth. So all these topics mixed up. There are many issues on this. In the post-truth era, now we ask what is woman, what is man. There is no such thing as woman or man. Intellectually, Western society is discussing this. There is no such thing as woman or man, so we have to get rid of all of these. So they create hundreds of sexual identities. So when we interpret it in the Western way, there is a skepticism empire built by women, and the skepticism states we have to criticize the women and men and their existence. But there are some truths that can't be changed. Woman is woman, man is man. So this is a very crazy part of work. So it is now insanity. But I can't say insanity because there are lots of psychiatrists here. But this is insanity. And legally we have to take this seriously. So within legal framework, we have to discuss this within the limits of freedom of expression. So 5 years later, maybe someone can say, you are making hate speech and this meeting is hate speech. Why is this hate speech? We don't hate anyone. But LGBT is not normal. This is all we say. In 2015, the Supreme Court they legalize all the gay marriages. So we have an American friend here. Kim Davis is a marital officer. He said the Supreme Court may have taken this legal right, but I don't condone this as a Christian, but he was forced to resign. And Supreme Court also decided his resignation. So when you as a state legalize this, you can't force people to accept this because of their faith or their conscience. So this is not only faith aspect of this. This is also a medical aspect of it, because the scientists who represent medical aspect of this, there are also many speaking about against the vaccination or pro-vaccination or against abortion, pro-abortion. So all of these are philosophical discussions. You can legalize abortion, but you can't say any doctor that you have to abort this baby. You can't force them. So you need to find someone who can abort the child. So you can't force the doctors to abort the children. So this is not possible and this is not ethical, but right now this is done, as we can see in the Kim Davis example. And another anecdote I have to give. In Hacettepe University, there is an academician who is the advocate of LGBT, and that person said, children are LGBT.
Sen
in the
LGBT
Turkish
olunca
law,
suçtan muaf mı oluyorsun? Bunu yazdım.
making
Dedim ki,
children,
LGBT olunca nasıl bir korumanız var?
use
Sizin ki
sexual terms
siz
or
LGBT,
making
çünkü
children
LGBT demek,
associate
cinsellik
themselves
demek,
with
çocuklar var
sexuality
dedim. 10
is
yaşında
a
bunlar eşcinsellik yaşasın demek. Birleşmiş
crime.
Milletler'in bile
So,
propagandaları bu yönde.
you can't
Bunu
force
yazdığım
children
için
to
o
choose their
LGBT sonrasında
sexuality
onda
or
tabii ki küçük
discuss their
tartışma.
sexuality.
Sonrasında da bir yazı yazdım. LGBT
And then I
aktivizmi
wrote
yasaklanmalıdır diye.
article.
İnternette de var. Bayağı okudum.
You can see it on the
Ben de
internet.
şaşırdım açıkçası.
And it was read by thousands of
O
people.
zamana kadar ben de çok farkında değildim.
And I
Böyle
wasn't
ortaya atıldım,
aware
yazdım.
of the delicacy of this
Ondan
matter
sonra
at the
bir
time.
kampanya başlatıldı.
And
Benim
then
yurt dışında
there was a
okuduğum bütün
campaign
okullara,
against me.
İngiltere'deki yayıncıma
And
kadar
this
hepsine beni
LGBT
şikayet
lobby,
ettiler. Ve
they
İngiltere'deki
criticized me and they wrote letters of condemnation against me to all the universities that I have studied.
Çıkarttılar. 10 senedir tanıtım yüzüydüm.
So I was university's
dedim ki hocam
web page and they deleted my page on the university.
Asılsın kesilsin demedim ki.
I spoke with the chairperson of the university
felsefi konular,
and I told them I didn't say these people should be killed. I just said this is a philosophical issue and we have to discuss the ethical aspect of this issue.
Sanki objektif bir gerçeklik üretiliyormuş gibi aslında post-truth. Yani yalan.
Because we are at the post-truth era,
üretiliyor.
they are producing a lie and they are making it seem like a objective truth, but we don't have to follow this objective truth that they have created. For example, France banned the use of veil, burqa.
Kabul ediyorum, özgürlüktür ama Fransa'da diyor ki ya bu benim
and France says
şoke eden bir şey.
This shocks
yani
my
İslam
public. So yes, it's an Islamophobic thing, but we have to sympathize with the people of France because veil, according to them, is something that demonizes women. So maybe we can agree with them. Switzerland banned the use of minarets of mosques. And they say this is against my culture. I don't agree with them. I want every European city to have minarets, but we have to sympathize with the people of those European cities. So these are social discussions. So we don't have a method for creating a sociological law. We always have to follow other countries' laws to create our own law. There is a very simple solution, as in the Russian example I will talk about. We can say this lifestyle, LGBT lifestyle, creates a confusion in our public.
Bizi ilgilendiriyor ama hukuki bakıyoruz. Şimdi en azından onların seküler bakışında buluşalım diyoruz.
So we can come together at the secular point
benim toplumda infial üreten, infial doğuran
of the LGBT's viewpoint.
Türkiye'de yasaklamamız lazım.
So we have to ban LGBT activism in Turkey.
TCK'da genel ahlaka aykırılık
and we already have such a law in Turkish law because there is a general ethical law in Turkish law. So we can ban this and we can ban the distribution of this. Because this LGBT trend disseminates by children seeing it and children getting examples from others. But we can see the LGBT lobby's despotism in this regard. There are many lawlessness in the LGBT discussion. In this meeting, we can speak very clearly and openly in this meeting, but we are right now sheltered. Although we are majority of this country, but we can't speak openly about this issue. And we can tell them to come together at a central point. So one of the legal issues is these homosexuals or other sexual identities and their lobbies, can we limit their freedom of expression?
dışa vurum özgürlüğü diyorum.
I can't say expression, but
genel anlamda da dışa vurum özgürlüğü daha
outcome.
iyi bir tercüme olduğunu düşünüyorum. Çünkü freedom of expression, expression dışa vurmak demek. İfade
Because
ise
expression
faydalandırma
means,
kökünden geliyor. Daha pozitif bir
expressing
anlamda,
an
faydalandırma
idea.
demek. Expression daha nötr. Dışa vurma yani düşündüğümü, İnandığımı
So
dışa vurma her
their
anlamda.
expression of
Bunların böyle bir
beliefs
dışa
or
vurma
ideas,
özgürlüğü var mıdır?
they have a
Yoktur
freedom
diyor.
of such expression,
En
but
azından
I
Türkiye'de
think
yoktur.
they don't have this
En azından
freedom
Türkiye'de
in
yoktur.
Turkey,
Müslüman
at least
ülkede yoktur.
in a
Hassasiyetleri olan
Muslim
ülkede
country
yoktur.
or in a
Ama,
country with delicacies.
Kaliforniya'da olabilir. Çünkü
But
onu
maybe in
değiştirmişler. 100 sene
California,
öncenin
because they
Kaliforniya'sıyla
changed it.
şimdi de bir değil.
Because
Çünkü
California
o
is not the same
propagandalar
as
o
it was in
toplumu
100
dönüştürmüş
years
durumda.
ago.
Artık Kaliforniya'da
Because the
normal
society
San
has been
Francisco'da
changed.
normal bir şeye
It is now
dönüştü.
normal in
Türkiye'de
California,
böyle
it's now normal
kere
in
bu
San
LGBT
Francisco,
lehine
and they are
dışa
trying
vurumlar
this in
yasaklanmalı.
Turkey as well.
Bunun
So we have to
altyapısı
first
mevcut,
limit
geliştirilebilir.
the freedom of expression
İkincisi
of
de, bu
LGBT.
Türkiye gibi ülkeler bağlamında,
But I'm speaking
ama
about
küresel bağlamda da
countries
şu,
like Turkey. But
LGBT
on a global
ve
scale,
eşcinsellik
LGBT
aleyhine ifadelerin
and
tamamen
homosexuality,
özgürlük kapsamında görülmesi. Nefret söylemi
these
öldürelim kesinlikle değil.
labels
Çünkü
should
Avrupa
be
İnsan Hakları Mahkemesi'nin
limited.
istikrarla kararlarında
Because we are not
vurguladığı şey var.
saying
İfade
we have to kill
özgürlüğü
them or destroy
sadece
them.
hoşa
We are
giden
just saying
ifadeleri
we
değil,
have to
provoke
limit
edici,
their
şoke edici, tahrik edici
provoking,
ifadeleri de
shocking
kapsar diyor.
expressions.
Bunu her kararında
So in the
söylüyor.
European
Ben de senin toplumunu öyle şoke
law,
ediyorum. Ben de İngiltere'ye geliyorum.
I believe that they are
LGBT'yi,
shocking us
LGBT,
or provoking
normal bir şey değildir
us with
diyorum.
their
Eşcinsel
expression
normal.
because
Ben de seni şoke,
I don't
aslında
see
şoke
it as
etmiyorum. Oranın
normal.
toplumu da biliyor. Ama hadi şoke edilmiş gibi bir oyun oynayalım
So
sizinle.
let's
Şoke
say
etmiş
we are
olalım, ifade
shocking
özgürlüğü. Bunu
Europe
tanımamız lazım.
with our expression.
Ama
You have
bu
to
bile tanımama
recognize our
noktasında
expression as
kendileriyle
well.
çelişen bir
But
içtihat
they are saying you
geliştiriyorlar.
have to recognize our own
kullanıyorlar.
freedom of expression, but we
Rusya
don't have
örneğine
to
geleceğim
recognize
demiştim. Rusya
your
bunu kestirip
freedom
attı.
of
Biz Türkiye
expression.
olarak 200'lüyüz.
So Russia,
200'lüyüz.
Russia
Yani
is
bizim
very
bir
clear on
taraftan,
that issue, but Turkey
İstanbul Sözleşmesi'nden
is
çekiliyoruz.
not
Aynı
clear.
süreçte işte
We have
Polonya'daydı.
Istanbul
Bu
Agreement on one
Polonya'da
side,
LGBT haklarının
and we have
geliştirilmesi
Poland
gerekir
on
diye
the
bir
other
ultimatum
side,
yayınladılar
because
Polonya'daki büyükelçiler.
Poland
Ben de bir tane
has made
büyükelçi,
an
Türk büyükelçisi
ultimatum
bunların içinde.
along with the
Türkiye'nin
Turkish
büyükelçisi gidiyor,
ambassador,
Polonya'da LGBT
52
alanını
ambassadors
genişletsin diyor. Yani
declared
Türkiye bunu
that
yapıyor.
LGBT should be more
Türkiye bunu yapıyor. Yani biz
free
200'lü bir ülkeyiz. Bunu
in
kestirip
Turkey.
atmıyoruz. Bu kestirip atılması gereken bir
So
mesele. Bunun başka bir
we are a
yok.
two-faced
Bana
country,
sorarsanız.
and we have to
Ama
just
küresel ölçekte de
be clear cut
LGBT
about
aleyhine
this
gelişen
issue.
ifade özgürlüğü olmalı.
So I
bizim
believe
burada
freedom
ölçütümüz
of
olamaz.
expression
Aynen kendisi
against
gelişmesi
LGBT
büyük bir
idea
literatür olur.
should be
Mesela
free.
Yahudi soykırımını reddederseniz
For
bu
example,
ifade özgürlüğü değildir.
If you deny
Yahudi soykırımı
Holocaust,
yoktur deseniz, işte
this is
Fransa'da
not freedom of
İsviçre'de öyle olması
expression.
lazım. Bu bir suçtur.
This is a
Ama,
crime.
Ermeni soykırımını
But
reddederseniz,
if you
bizim
deny
malum Doğu Perinçek İsviçre'deki
Armenian
Ermeni soykırımı yoktur
genocide,
demişti. Sonra yargılandı
this is a
ve
freedom of
AİHM'e taşıdı
expression.
davayı. Doğu Perinçek'in yaptığı hayırlı işlerden biri, ne kadar vardır bilmiyorum.
So the Perinçek, who is a Turkish politician,
Doğu Perinçek,
was appealed in the European Court, High Court, and the High Court decided that
reddetmek ifade özgürlüğü
denying
değildir.
Holocaust is not a
Ama bu
freedom of
dedikleri özgür
expression,
bir durumdur.
but this is only
Bunun
for the Jewish
genişletilmesi de
people.
kabul edilemez.
So
Ermeni
we can't
soykırımını
expand
reddetmek ifade
this
özgürlüğüdür dedi.
concept.
Böyle bir karar
So
var.
Armenian
bunu
genocide denial
tamamen böyle
is
seçmeci bir şekilde.
is okay. It's not a
bunu
crime.
önceliyorum, bunu öncelemiyorum. Mantığıyla.
So this is only
Biz
about
Avrupa
prioritization
hukukuna
or
takılamayız.
non-prioritization.
Benim zaten şöyle bir teorim var.
So I have a
Türk milleti
theory
olarak, Doğu
that
milleti olarak
as a
kendimizi
Turkish
görüyoruz ya.
people, we
Batılılar
see
çok daha
ourselves
fazla
as
konumdur.
smaller
İnanın böyledir.
people, but I
Batılılar
believe
çok daha
Western
fazla konumdur.
people are more
20-30
sheep-like.
senede propagandayla
In
Avrupalı, Amerikalı
20-30
arkadaşlar
years,
ben
with propaganda,
kendim
they
10 seneden
can be
fazla
turned
yaşadım.
into
Yani,
sheeples. Because I lived
Mustafa
there in
hocamız
10
kadar,
years,
orada
for 10
20-30
years.
senelik propagandayla
Only
alamayacağın hiçbir
20-30
sonuç
year
yoktur.
long propaganda,
Ama
you
sonuç
can get
alırsın,
every
toplumu
kind
değiştirirsin,
of
kafasını
result that
değiştirirsin.
you
Bizim
want.
Türkleri değiştiremezsin.
You can change
Biridir,
the
oradan biri
society,
direnir,
but
buradan
in
aşı
Turkey
bile
you can't
yaptıramıyorsun
change
yani.
the
Neden?
society
Çünkü
that
insanlar
easily,
direniyor,
because
sorguluyor.
our people are more resilient on that matter.
Ya ben biraz sivri konuşuyorum ya.
So you shouldn't say Turkey is two-faced. So
Evet.
I believe you shouldn't say that.
Tamam, düzeltiyorum.
So please correct that
Yani
Turkey is
kimseyi
not
rencide etmek
two-faced.
amacımız yok. Biz
I
zaten
didn't want to offend anyone.
tamam.
We love you,
Ya biz
but you
totalde
need to
200'lüyüz
correct
diyorum. Yoksa ben yönetici
What I'm
200
saying
demiyorum.
is, I'm not saying our administration is two-faced.
Totalde-
I'm saying
total-
our community is two-faced.
Evet. Bunları konuşacağız. Bizim hükümetimiz de çok değerli. Biz de
I believe our administration is also very valuable. We can criticize our administration, and we are a free society. So
Rusya örneğiyle bitireyim, daha fazla zaman almayayım. Rusya 2013
I want to give Russian example.
In 2013, geleneksel değerlerin dışındaki
created a law so against the non-traditional lifestyle against the children.
Bunu çıkardı ve dedi
so with this law, Russia banned all non-traditional relations in Russia and propaganda of this non-traditional relations. So they are taking this into account. They are also a member of European Council,
pazarlık süreci yürütüyorlar.
But they are bartering
this Putin çok
and
açık
trying to protect their identity. Putin is clearly declaring that this LGBT movement is not innocent. It is trying to change the societal norms of all the world, and it's only 5% of the total population, but they are saying we are the 95%.
Bu iş istismar ediliyor.
So
hukukun bunu
we have to create legal
gerekiyor. Hem Türkiye bağlamında hem de küresel
means
bağlamda
of
teşekkür
limiting this. So thank you very much. I'm sorry if I offended anybody.
Emir Kaya hocamıza gerçekten bu anlamlı, akıcı, güzel, zevkli konuşmasından dolayı çok teşekkür ediyorum. Çok sağ olun. Dillerinize sağlık. Ve şimdi cinsel kimlik karmaşasıyla bağlantılı tedavi talebinin reddinin hukuki boyutu konunun sunumunu yapmak üzere Doçent Doktor Sayın Murat Tümay.
Çok kıymetli hanımefendiler ve
honorable guests,
Dünya Çocuk ve Aile Koruma Platformu Başkanı
Dünya Çakop Chairperson Ms. Zuhal, so and all the partners and NGOs, representatives, all the academicians, rectors, thank you very much. And I salute you all. Yes, we are discussing a very important issue. This is not only our threat. This is not a threat for us only. This is threatening humanity, the future of humanity, and the new generations. And the Western society, they are our brothers, and this also affects their future as well. So this is a great threat and problem, and we should recognize this as such. So, and Mr. Mike Davidson presented this as well, and we will listen to our American friend as well. So we should recognize this problem, and we should come together with international representatives who agree with us, and it is very important today that they are here. And Mr. Emir discussed the philosophical and ethical point of this issue, and I will talk about the legal aspects and some boring aspects of this in international and our national law, and what can be the basis of fight against this issue. And the name of the platform is Protecting Children and Family. And family is the main element of the society. So in order to create a humanity that is healthy, is creating a healthy family. And we have to protect families and children in this regard. So when we take note of this, recently, as others have said, LGBT homosexual lobby has become a very commanding approach. And when we look at the human rights laws and all the contracts that takes account of the human rights, they have their say very freely. And there is a breach of interest here. So we should condemn ourselves because we are not protecting families and children enough. So we are not working hard enough. So we are getting these kinds of breaches. So in Turkish law, 41st article states that family should be protected. It says family is the main element of Turkish society, and state should be responsible for protecting the family and children, and they should take all the necessary means to protect the family. So the state itself has the duty to protect the family in accordance with our own law. So this family, so what kind of family consists of what kind of partners? So our law, article number 335, states that mother, father, and the children all have responsibilities against each other. And the family is constituted by the marriage of a man and woman. This is all stated in our own law. So this is the national law that concerns this issue, and many laws state that. And also the first drafts of the international laws that the lobby is taking basis of, international laws also state that family is as such, and it is also protected and safeguarded by it as well. All the men and women who are at the age of marriage are free and have the right to get married. So international law also states that family is constituted of man and woman and their marriage. So biological woman and man are gathering together and creating the family. So this is a regional law regarding Europe. So when we look at the United Nations, Article 23 also protects the family and the familial values. So it states that family is the main element of the society. And in order for society to develop healthily, family is needed. So this is also stated in the international law, in the United Nations law as well. And state should protect them. And every man and woman have the right to marry. So this is also stated in the international law as well. So the main philosophy behind the international law also safeguards the marriage and partnerships consisting of man and woman. So what is done by the lobbies? So they are trying to breach and attack this understanding of family. So we need to go back to our roots, and we need to regain our values that we had in the past. So this is not the responsibility of us, and this is not a threat against us, this is a threat against everybody. So Supreme Court issues, let's talk about them. some decisions made by the Supreme Court. In 1986, they categorized homosexuals as individuals who do not condone by the social norms and they are threatening the society. And they also stated that homosexuality is against the society's health and ethics and moralities. In 2015, there was another decision. It was stating that violating animals, violating dead bodies, or unnatural sexual intercourses are a crime. And people who are disseminating these kinds of material and media are sentenced by the Turkish law. So unnatural intercourse means homosexual intercourse. So this is a decision that have been given by the Supreme Court. So this is very important. So these decisions and state that they are not natural and they are a threat against society. So we can see that in the Turkish law. And again, in 2017, there was a decision for the military law. It was stated that if someone makes an unnatural intercourse with someone else, unnatural intercourse, or a soldier who performs this act are dishonorably discharged from the military. So this is also stated in our military law as well. And they objected to this decision, and they stated that this was against the private life of a person, but it was denied, stating that because of military rules, they are dishonorably discharged. So this issue is not an issue that can be viewed from the framework of international human rights or private lives. Let's agree that they are. But on the other hand, the protection of the private life, and also in accordance with our law and in accordance with the international law, states that our private life are protected. So this LGBTQ ideology is not an expression of freedom that can't be limited. So general ethical values of this society, the LGBTQ ideology is a breach of this, so we can deem it as that. So we can put forward our own social norms and ethical values, and we can create a new law, or we can use the already in power law as well, because we have such laws in the Turkish law system, legal system. So interpreting on a law, so in the European human rights contract states that the right to education, so the European human rights states that education, right to education can be used to right to educate children in homosexual educations. So this is what they put forward as their legal basis. Parents should be giving this education in accordance with their faith or their ideology. So when a state provides education to the children, they should be respectful towards the parents' faith and ideology. So children, during the development of their identity, shouldn't be forced by their parents. So state should protect the children. Also parents, they have their own responsibility to protect their children. So the parents can decide that their child should not get an education or sexual identity education that condones their own faith or ideology. So after the age of 18, a person is considered an individual, so they have their say in their rights. So if they condone any decisions or sexual identity choice, so if they want a treatment, therapy, they can decide on that. They can decide that they should get such treatment or therapy, and banning such therapies or banning that person from getting that therapy is actually against the human rights. Because everyone has a right to get therapy that they say they need. So LGBTs banning the lobbies, banning this right to get a therapy or get treatment for this issue is against human rights. So I don't understand this, how they can be so powerful. So this lobby is stating that we are protecting the individual, but they are not protecting the family or the decision of the family. So they shouldn't be banning the treatment or therapy. So I believe that legal banning of these therapies or treatments are not possible. So by establishing this in Turkey, we will put an example in all around the world. So we should make some studies that can be an example for all the world. And lastly, I will also give an example in Hungary. So educational rights of the child and the parents say in this, in June, they stated that children under the age of 18 should not get any education that teaches homosexuality. So now in Hungary, they can't promote or educate children under the age of 18 about homosexuality. So this is done by the parents' right to educate their children and Hungary's own ethical values. So this is what we should do. These kinds of sexual orientations are against our ethical, moral values. We are not saying these people should be killed or these people should be jailed. They can live as they want. But if people don't want to live like that, you can't force them to live like that. So getting treatment and therapy is also a right, so we should protect that right. Thank you very much. I can't hear the question because there is no microphone.
Herhalde arkadaşlar duyamıyorlar.
This treatment right, banning the treatment right, all the health issues that the person gets because they are denied the treatment, can we deem it as malpractice? Can we deem it that? And can we appeal to a court? As I said, this is a legal issue. And this legal issue is shaped by the society's ethical values and the society's wants. So people should create legal laws in accordance with their own values. So I believe in Turkey we have such legal states. So we should be taking steps by steps. So we can't fight them on all fronts, but we should first establish that this is a right that can't be denied to the patient, to the individual, and we should convince the society that this treatment is a right and we should give the treatment or therapy the individual needs. So this is only done by the society's agreement. Thank you. Because we are insider, we know all the psychologists or psychiatrists think that, most of them think that this is natural and there is no such therapy and there is no treatment to this. They misinform all the clients. So this malpractice should be punished. Let's think medical doctors. And if they malpractice and getting client harm, or because this is also considered a medical malpractice because of AIDS or sexually transmitted diseases, because they get into hundreds of intercourses. So this is a medical issue. So we don't have time to make them wait. Yes, this is a threat against the individual. This is also a threat against the society. So we need to take measures against these. So there is no scientific criticism on the other side. So we don't have any scientific basis on the LGBT front. So this is why we can't discuss with them. Because they are saying, dogmatically, they are saying this is an inborn thing. Homosexuality is by nature, so you can't change it. So this is not scientific. So this is why we can't discuss with them. But we need to use scientific methods, and we need to convince them that this is something that is not natural, and this is something that can be treated, and a therapy can be used, and there is a right to therapy for everyone. So this is not this is unacceptable. So I believe we can do this to take measures against a therapy ban in Turkey. Thank you very much. Thank you. Do you have any questions? In United Kingdom, I have met a client. So after the age of 12, without the consent of the parents, the children can get injection therapy, hormone therapy, after the age of 12. And a woman changed sex before she was 18, and then she said she was forced to change sex. So she appealed to the Supreme Court of United Kingdom, and she said, I was not at the age of consent, I was forced, and you allowed me to change my sex. So any kind of medical and invasive treatments or hormone therapies to children. So we can use these as arguments as well, as a legal framework. So without consent or without confirmation, so for children, if this is emergency or urgent, we should get the so Planned Parenthood does this without the consent of the parents. So this is illegal. So there's no other question. Thank you. Mr. Murat Tumay, thank you very much. Now we will take a break, lunch break. So afternoon will start at 2:20 p.m. Honorable guests and our guests outside of the conference room, please come inside and we will start our program. Honorable guests, so the first day of our platform's afternoon program has started. Now we will have a traumatic therapy, IMTT, image transformation therapy, and for this therapy we will have David Pickup. Please welcome Mr. David Pickup.
Daha güçlü bir alkış olursa herhalde daha hızlı olur. Amerika'ya biraz torpil geçti.
Good afternoon. I'm thrilled and honored to be here for a lot of reasons. One reason is because if you told me 10 years ago I'd be someday in Turkey talking about all these important issues, I would have said, you're crazy. But I'm glad to be here, and I'm so honored to be here because already in only 2 days, I feel that this country I don't know anything about has been honoring and respectful and passionate and inquisitive and spiritual, and it's an honor to be here with such friendly and professional people. So thank you, especially to my hosts. I can't thank you enough for giving me the opportunity to be here and speak to you about issues that are absolutely essential, in my opinion, to modern civilization. Never before in history, as far as I know, has homosexuality ever risen to the level of codifying sexuality in these ways to form the fabric of normalcy of society. Not even ancient times were homosexual issues ever risen to the level of marriage. It boggles the mind how supposedly sane people have fallen for such deceptions. It boggles the mind how supposedly good people in the countries all over the world have fallen for messages that are leading to their destruction. And I don't mean that unkindly. I mean that with all due respect for the rights of everyone's autonomy to live the way that they believe that they are supposed to live. The world is in a, I know the world will always be in turmoil. I know that. That's just the nature since the fall of man. But to hear so much turmoil happen so fast in such profoundly injurious ways that are questioning our very existence of what it means to be human, where men can be women and women can be men with a simple operation, or sexuality can, without any scientific proof at all, supposedly be normal no matter who or what you're attracted to, and it all be called normal and fulfilling. For these ideas to be promulgated the world over by such vast entities like social media, ideas that are dark can be across the world in 5 seconds instead of 100 years. That makes us wonder about what our part we will play in the world today. And certainly in America, there are many, many, many of us who are wondering what part we're going to play on the world stage, but also in our individual country and in our home lives and in our churches. Many of us are worried and we don't know what to do. And I'm hoping as a result of this conference that you will be much more informed about what to do. There are several individuals across the world, some of whom are here today, that are telling you what I believe to be the truth, emotionally, psychologically, politically, even spiritually. I think we're on the right track, but we're few in number. But I think I'm also correct in saying, for just a few moments before I begin the presentation, that probably most of the world's cataclysmic and wonderful changes have been through the ideas and actions of actually a very few people. And so who knows, maybe in this auditorium today are those individuals who are going to lead your country and help lead other countries out of this darkness that is reaching tidal wave proportions. About 5 years ago, did you know that the lions started coming back into Turkey? Anybody familiar with that? Did you know that there used to be lions in Turkey? I don't know. I saw an article today online that about 5 years ago, lions began to return to the land of Europe, but also Turkey. So who knows? Maybe today there are lions here that will start to roar and start to take these things and act like lions, who are sometimes gentle and respectful, but will sometimes go to the heart of a matter and destroy it when it needs to be destroyed. I'm saying these things with all due respect, compassion, and truth. There's a principle I often talk about in every speech now. I believe in the principles of compassion and truth, and that's the basis of what I do, both spiritually and psychologically. I often say that without truth, there is no compassion. Think about it. Without truth, there is no compassion. That describes pretty much the LGBT activists' role. They seem to have all the compassion that anyone could probably have, but because their belief systems are fundamentally based on inaccurate philosophies, they're not compassionate. And we must keep that in mind. It's also true that if you have the truth and have no compassion, what good is it? So that's why I try my best to be a champion for both concepts, which I think are based not only in our mutual religions, but are true across the board for all human beings. So that's what I want to speak to you today about, is truth and compassion. And I'm hoping you'll see it today demonstrated in an actual therapeutic process that will be demonstrated here with a client in just a little while. I wanted to tell you about a new form of therapy intervention. This intervention can be used pretty much across the board for any kind of theory, no matter what psychological theory you espouse or belong to or believe in. And here's the philosophical underpinnings of this, what I believe is probably it's a bold claim, and I'm gonna make some bold claims today, and I'm not gonna apologize for that, but it's gonna be some bold claims. Hopefully you'll see a little bit of that today. But I believe image transformation therapy, in terms of what happens in the therapy office, in terms of what happens in the emotional mind of the client, is probably gonna change the world. And I'm gonna make a bold claim like that because this therapy, this therapeutic intervention, IMTT, is based on the principle as well that God created the mind and heart and body to essentially, if given the opportunity, to heal themselves. Let me give you an illustration. When you break your leg and you go to the doctor, does the doctor heal you? No, he never does. He sets the bone and the body heals itself, right? Who's responsible for that design of healing? I believe most of us would say God himself. It's the same thing with the mind. When you find a way for the mind to heal the traumas and the issues that deal with those, that compensate for those traumas, the mind, in theory, will do it much better than some kind of completely only human being invented kind of procedure. And I believe that's why this procedure is so thorough and so fast, because we're actually utilizing much more, at least, of the power of the human mind to give it a chance to heal itself of the injuries that are caused by trauma and the addictions, the compensatory mechanisms, some of which are homosexuality and transgender feelings, to actually heal those issues when we employ the ways, the unique ways that the mind has to do that. You're going to be, you're probably going to think this is voodoo. Does everyone know what voodoo is? Okay, let me find another word. You're probably going to think I'm saying this is magic. It's not magic, not at all. But we're going to see, hopefully firsthand, you're going to see what it looks like for me to have a session of a part of therapy, a piece of therapy that so far has worked with about 90 to 95% of my clients in a very fast and very profound way over the past 3 years. This therapy intervention is new. Certainly it's brand new, but from a psychological historical perspective. It's about where EMDR was 30 years ago. You know, 30 years ago, those of you who know, and there are some people who know what EMDR is all about here, about 30 years ago, EMDR was beginning, and everybody thought it's crazy, how could it ever work? It's too simple, it's just like magic, it's ridiculous. And now it's one of the #1 treatments for trauma and PTSD at least in America. And so I think that's probably where this is. I think EMDR is terrific, it can work. But this, I believe, is even better. I can explain the reasons why later, but I believe this is better because it takes even more advantage, just like EMDR does, which has the same principle of letting the body and mind heal itself. IMTT can do that even better, I believe. But it's going to sound kind of weird at first. So bear with me, if you would please. Just bear with me, and we'll see how it goes today. Okay. Before we start in explaining what actually happens with IMTT, in my opinion, especially if you're a clinician, but not only if you're a clinician, if you're a mother and father, if you're a politician, if you're a doctor, a leader of any kind, you've got to know the underlying catalytic or causal issues of the problem itself. So that's why I ask people all the time, what do you think are the causes of homosexual feelings or transgender feelings? I want to tell you something right now. It's a good thing to remember. I'm a guy that likes bullet points. I like to bottom line it. I like to start with a basic principle and make that very clear as much as possible. So let me start with a basic principle you don't hear a lot. Homosexuality is not about homosexuality. Homosexual feelings are the symptom of an underlying issue that, if not resolved, homosexual feelings will very likely continue strongly, at least in theory, forever. So you've got to know what the issues are underneath the homoerotic feelings, underneath the transgender feelings, because those feelings are pleasure principles that are compensating for the extreme traumas and unfulfilled needs that are underneath all of these issues. What you don't know will hurt you. What you don't know will hurt your client. Now, there's different ways we can put these causes. Certainly, I'm giving you a very short, succinct version of a much more complicated issue, but I want to be succinct today because I think we need succinctness right now. But except for some tangential issues, there's 3 basic causes in reality. All right? The reason why I believe this is because every single one of my clients and every single one of the clients of all my colleagues in America claim the same thing. They hear the same things. Those of you who already know the work of Dr. Nicolosi, he was my mentor and my trainer. He said the same thing for the past 30 years. He's never seen a client. I have an open mind. I have a very open mind. I'm waiting for the day when there are no issues producing homosexual issues, but so far that day has not come. And so these are the basic issues you must know before you can effectively deal with these issues therapeutically in the office with a therapist. Number 1, an extreme lack of need fulfillment from primary role models. Now think about that for a moment. It sounds a little bit light, but I want to assure you that it absolutely is a trauma that, if not corrected, including if it's neglect, which is a form of trauma, we're not talking about, I'm going to be talking today mainly about male homosexuality. I'll talk later if you want me to about female homosexuality, but I'm talking primarily about male homosexuality. I assure you that when a man or a boy comes into my office, he doesn't usually know what it feels like to be loved by his own father, or to be loved by his own brothers, or to be loved by his own male peers. Some of them, that love is bullied away from them. They don't know what it feels like to be approved of by other males. For whatever the reason, sometimes death of dads, sometimes divorce, sometimes emotional unavailability. There are vast reasons, but when it all comes down to this first principle, they don't get what they need. They don't know what it feels like to have a father look at them in their eyes and tell them and show them, not just through actions, but through emotional bonding. They don't know what it feels like. Most men know what it feels like, and they take it for granted because everything is kind of normal in that area. But this population of men, they don't know what it feels like, and they get used to it, and they don't even know that they, in some cases, that they needed it until their heart breaks open later on when they discover underneath the homoerotic feelings, up comes this grief, and then you see it. The needs basically are, we call sometimes 3 A's: approval, affection, and affirmation. If you can keep that in mind, you'll know the heart of homosexuality more than maybe you know already. Boys need approval, affirmation, and affection. It's an attachment issue. I could explain all of this. I don't have time to do that today in depth, but I could explain this also in terms of attachment theory, which some of you guys know already. The theory in layman's terms of attachment theory is, if I don't attach to my same-sex role model, I won't attach to my whole self. So if a boy, for whatever reason, is not attached to his father or primary male role models, he won't be attached to the strength and security of his own sense of maleness in his own body subjectively. It's an attachment issue. All that, sometimes unperceived, but all that trauma is what's going on underneath the homoerotic feelings. And then number 2, this is almost always, in fact, I would say always, in my experience, accompanied by a rather severe form of gender identity inferiority. It's especially true for transgenders, but in the homosexual population, or even men that just have a less serious, but serious enough issue with gender issues, these are the boys that feel inferior. These are the boys who don't connect with other boys at school. These are the boys who usually get bullied. These are the boys whose self-esteem as boys is put down. Sometimes they're treated harshly by male authority figures to, quote, toughen them up. Well, you can only do that successfully if you have a good relationship with a boy. If the relationship is not based on trust or love, then it's very hard to get away with that. So we're dealing with a very severe case of gender identity inferiority. I'm making such a big deal about this is because chances are most of you are not seeing clients like this in offices or don't know about what's going on in therapy offices. But these issues are what I see in my office every single day. And the trauma, the grief, the heartbreak, the inferiority, the terror, the fear is huge. And to make it worse, a lot of boys and young men, because they're too busy trying to be tough in the world, won't ever talk about it. And then when these issues aren't resolved and they result in homosexual feelings or transgender feelings, then they all of a sudden come out and you wonder, well, how could that possibly have happened? I'm trying to assure you that you need to be assured in order to effectively deal with compassionately and with truth. If you're going to truly help this population, you're going to have to know this information. Please don't go away from here with some kind of scientific only, although the science is marvelous. Don't go away only with a scientific view of this. Go to the heart and soul of these issues and you'll find not only what the problem is, you're going to find the solutions. And one of the solutions I'm hoping to demonstrate effectively for you today. And the third one is obvious. The science says that somewhere between 50 and 70% of homosexuals have been sexually abused. Anywhere from fondling to major sexual abuse. But sexual abuse is sexual abuse. And I find it extraordinary that the world at large, even though we tell them that sexual abuse can form certain aspects of sexual feelings and identity, it doesn't matter to them. They want what they want. They want homosexuality and transgenderism to be normal, and it doesn't matter about these causes. I've been in 20 states, or about 20 states in the United States for the last 10 years talking about these issues, and most people just won't listen because they're too involved in political machinations and power and money. And so I decided a long time ago, primarily due to my faith, that I was going to speak up. And I'm doing this because, well, various reasons. Because of my faith in Jesus Christ, the Savior of mankind. And I'm doing this because I'm so honored to be here and to share with you a commonality on these gender and sexual issues. And I'm so thrilled to be, hopefully, a person that's able to help you not reinvent the wheel, but to build on each other and be effective for your country, but also in the other countries. And I'm here for your children. I don't have any kids of my own. Long story short, never mind. But in a way I do. I can't be their actual fathers. That would be unethical for me to try to be someone's dad in the therapy office. That would be counterproductive and unethical. But who I see in my office every day is going to be a little girl, even though she's a grown woman in her heart. Who I see in my office is going to be a grown man who's a hurt, traumatized little boy. And then when I see minor children who are under 18, which is there's quite a few of them, they still are children. And when they come in my office, my belief is rekindled in what the problem is and then what they need. And sometimes I do wish I was their father, because sometimes, I don't mean to sound egotistical about this, but sometimes I know the answers really quickly that their fathers and mothers just don't get. I don't mean that to put anyone down, but sometimes I know what the answers are instantly. And sometimes I wish I could just reach over to them and give them what they need so they could just be done with these issues. But I can't. I can only do the best I can, and I can only teach people how to be the most expert therapist in the world, hopefully, to help people with these issues. I can only teach parents what I believe to be what truly works. And so that's why we start with the wounds first. Most people will have a heart for discussing homosexuality and transgenderism much more openly in society if you first explain to them what the real issues are. And those are the real issues. Don't forget that. Deal with that. Even if you have your own children that are dealing with these issues. If you know this, then you can start on a pathway to healing. All right. I don't have my laptop up here, so or else I have to turn around. A little bit more about, speaking again about male homosexuality, so you know the path of how a boy, before we start a process out of it, how that process begins, is that I'll explain it actually in computer terms. We're all familiar with computer terms now very well, I think. So if it is true that God created boys with the male programming so that that boy can develop over time with good, healthy male relationships into full-on manhood, then if something interrupts that process, that program will go somewhere else to try to get fulfilled. So that's what, in terms of computer processes, that's how I'd like to explain homosexuality to you for just a moment. If it's true that that boys and men tend to sexually objectify other men's bodies, it's because their own male programming has been shut down. Why? Through trauma, through unfulfilled needs, through shaming, feeling inferior. And so if those needs are never fulfilled and the flower of manhood does not occur in a normal way over years into, by the time he's 20, then it's not a certainty, but there is a likelihood, more of a likelihood, that boy will develop homosexual feelings, because when you shut down all the regular ways of getting male need fulfillment, your male programming will automatically search for a way that they can get those needs fulfilled. So let's say the need, which is inherent to every man, is masculinity. God created, those of us who are male, God created us to be male. There's nothing we can do about it. It's true. No matter what you do, you're going to be seeking, either consciously or unconsciously, maleness and the fulfillment of that. Well, if you shut down your male programming through shame or loss or whatever the traumas are, there's only one other way that a male can get maleness, and that's through the body of another man. And that's the moment when maleness turns into an object, therefore a sexual object. And it usually happens around the time of puberty, when the sexual hormones kick into the body system, or, unfortunately, earlier if there's sexual abuse involved. So, objectifying the male body, that's a little bit of an explanation of how it happens. I want to make sure I'm on the right track. So number 2 there is up there because it's telling you a little bit more about the compensatory nature of addictions, whatever that addiction is. Homosexuality, drugs, alcohol, even transgender feelings. They can all be seen in terms of a compensatory mechanism to resolve trauma. It doesn't really work, but it's sometimes the most automatic thing that happens to a person, and they think because it happens so early that they're born that way. That's what they think. And it's easy to see. It's easy to see why they would think that. But we're trying to promote the truth here. And one way we promote the truth is, if all this is true, what we're saying today, then there must be psychological, emotional, and relational interventions that would help heal those wounds so that the natural, authentic self can lose their symptoms of homoeroticism, and the natural self, in this case men, naturally rise to the top. That's another reason why I do this work, by the way. I actually get to see in my office what it's like for a client to look up at me, sometimes with tears, sometimes with joy, sometimes with both, and to tell me they don't feel homosexual feelings anymore. Or they feel homosexual feelings sometimes, but they're so low, it's like, who cares? I'll explain more about that in a minute, of what happens to a client. But I want you to know that we've talked a lot about client rights today, as we should. It's been brilliant today so far. And this is getting now down to the heart and soul of the matter of what actually happens in therapy. And that's what our clients are telling us. We're not asking them, hey, did you get rid of your homosexual feelings today? We would never do that. We simply ask them how they feel. Tell us about what their experience is. What was your reaction to these processes? And they tell us. And this is the kind of thing they're telling us, is that I feel whole in my masculine body. I feel like I want to be that guy. I don't want to have sex with him. This grosses me out now. Why did I ever think I could get masculinity from pornography? I don't get it. We're hearing things like that now, and we're hearing them a lot faster with the process I'm just about to show you. So if a person reacts in an expression where sexual feelings appear to actually change, over time, of course, it's not a magic pill, I'm not offering that to you today, then I know 2 things. Number 1, it can't be inborn, it's not genetic. And number 2, it's changeable. Well, wouldn't you know it, that's the very two things the LGBT caucus activists do not want you to know and do not want the world to talk about. But we're talking about it here today. I've already talked about some of this. I've already talked about all of this, actually, so good, I beat the gun. Let me mention a little bit more about transgenderism, however. Actually, in my opinion, transgenderism is on a similar spectrum as homosexuality. In transgenderism, you have a much more early set of traumas that happen during the initial gender developmental stage, usually around 6 months to 3 years of age of life for a child. The family system is usually extremely chaotic, extremely dysfunctional. Sometimes there's massive problems, and the effort, although the effort of transgender feelings or the wish to be the other gender is present, it's still compensatory for trauma. So the child doesn't know how to deal with abandonment and trauma, and so he notices that the other sex keeps him safe or is more beautiful, or there's something good about that and horrible about the other sex. And so because his gender is so fluid at that time, he'll opt for the other gender because he's trying to survive. And if you don't know that as a clinician, you're not going to know how to deal, in my opinion, very well with your clients. So you've got to know the traumas. They're the same kinds of traumas, but there's even more so and usually more intense, including sexual abuse in the transgender world. But we're gonna talk about both in a sense today, even though there are some differences that I don't have time to go into. But they're enough alike where we're trying to lump them together to some extent. Okay. I'm going to begin to go into a little bit more detail on IMTT, Image Transformation Therapy. In IMTT, in dealing with the actual sexual issues, I'm talking about male homosexuality for just a few moments, there are what we call feeling states. What is a feeling state? It's very simple. In layman's terms, a feeling state is a normal need, such as masculinity, that gets in the mind hooked into sexual feelings. Okay? Repeat that. A feeling state is a normal need that tries to get fulfilled or gets hooked into the mind in terms of sex, in terms of sex, especially in terms of homosexuality. So in other words, why has a man sexualized another man's body? Because his need for masculinity, which is totally legitimate and necessary, it's a non-negotiable need, because of trauma underneath, it gets hooked into the compensatory feeling of sex, all right? So it's always a positive feeling associated with the behavior that really is dysfunctional or that doesn't work. That's what a feeling state is. And you're gonna hear in just a few minutes a feeling state work demonstration right in front of you. That's why that's relevant. Masculinity is a feeling state. Again, we're talking about men primarily today. Masculinity is a feeling state. What's the opposite of masculinity? Where the wound is? Inferiority. Kind of obvious. Power is a feeling state. What's the opposite of that? Powerless. Feeling state is love, or the need to be lovable. What's the opposite? No love, or I'm unlovable. Acceptance. Acceptance is a feeling state. Everyone needs that. If you don't have enough, you'll be in real trouble, especially growing up emotionally. What's the opposite of acceptance? No acceptance, or I'm unacceptable. And the last one, there's a lot more than this, but I'm giving you the basics today. A feeling state of winning. We all need to feel like we're maybe not winning in their, I don't know how it is in your language, but winning in the sense of we've arrived or we've achieved something or we're developing our true selves, the winning in that sense. And what's the opposite? I'm a loser. So do you see the inherent feeling states and then the underlying traumatic issue? That's what this is supposed to illustrate. So we'll be using feeling states in the first half of the demonstration today. If we have time, I'm going to try my best to undergo 2 interventions today, one for sexual feelings, for a sexual image that's a problem, and one for underlying traumas that's just strictly about trauma, usually in childhood. There's other feeling states such as I'm desirable and safety. Without safety, we can't exist as human beings. We have to have a certain degree of safety, so that's why this is important that I mention them here. Okay, so you might ask yourself, it's a good question to ask yourself always, no matter who you are, even if you're not a therapist. What would have to happen to a person whose issues with these wounds would lead to compelling traumas or addictions? That's the questions to ask your children if they're having these issues, or the people you know, the families that you know. If you're a clinician, psychologist, psychiatrist, that's one of the most important things you can get. When I have a client start therapy, we start with their emotional history. Within that emotional history that they fill out tells me everything. Tells me everything. I know right where to go with both their traumas and the addictive qualities that they've developed later. So that kind of a question is always going to be insightful, even for a parent, because if you notice that your child is having some problems, you're going to want to ask them, well, why does he have this problem? There must be something going on underneath all that stuff on the top. You'll be very wise if you do that. Okay, so just a pictorial example. I've already said it, but just so you have a visual example. In the mind, in terms of trauma and addictions, you have a strong emotion and a strong image. This is dealing, I believe, with trauma. Yeah. In the mind, when you're dealing with just plain trauma, when you think about it for a moment, when a person is traumatized, let's say as a child, let's say that they're bullied by male peers. Why do they still care, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously? Why do they still care? Why are they so affected by something that happened so many years ago? Because the temperature of the emotion is still that high. If they know what it feels like to be bullied and shamed and made to feel inferior and there's no resolution, that high emotional intensity is still in their body system, along with being hooked up with that image of being traumatized. That's why trauma hangs around in the body-mind system, and that's what we're gonna address today exactly. There's 2 main goals in this case. Reduce the temperature of the emotion so that we can then dissolve the traumatic message so it all goes out of the system. And if that can happen through a process, then the mind is freed up. And in theory, a client would say something like, this doesn't bother me at all anymore. But we'll see. Now, when you're talking about addictions and issues like homosexual feelings, transgenderism, could be anything, drugs, that kind of thing, it's the same basic mechanisms, but there's a feeling state. This one on the left is acceptance. It's a very common one, acceptance. These are the boys and girls, if we're talking about girls, that don't feel accepted their whole lives. Sometimes people never know it, but there's this terrible, terrible, painful, even terrorizing sometimes feeling of I'm not acceptable. Well, how do they get through that? They look for a compensatory mechanism called porn, in some cases, on the right-hand side. So when they're looking at porn and get addicted to it, what's really going on is they're searching for their long-lost acceptability. They're longing, aching for someone to truly accept them. But if no one's there for them, or they don't know how to figure it out on their own, or if no one's around them to help them like they need to be helped, those things combine together like you can see it, and the mind is hooked. So, this is a good way to think about it very succinctly, if you want to carry this with you today. Asking, if this is the case for a male who's addicted to gay porn, if his real issue is masculinity or acceptableness, then asking him to never look at gay porn again is just like telling him he can't be masculine or acceptable. That's where the addiction is. That's what the real problem is. So the solution is really not about simply telling him, stop looking at porn, even though that would be advisable. The issue is really about how do you unhook this from the mind? Because it feels like to that client that they can't be acceptable or masculine unless they see it in a pornographic version. Do you understand? If you get this, you'll really get what these issues are all about. All right, so in a few minutes, we're going to have a few moments actually, we're going to have a demonstration. I'm going to have a young man up here who's graciously volunteered to go through a process. I want to make sure though, if you'll kindly respect, I just want to make sure, I think you've already done this, but I just want to make sure that you kindly respect his confidentiality and autonomy and make sure all your cameras are off. Will you do that now, please? If you haven't done it already, make sure your phones are not in video or picture mode, that they're just down, and no cameras, who have nothing to hide, but I'm just going to respect this guy for his own privacy's sake, which I think is a good idea. So I'll just take a moment to make sure that that is true, that there's...
So they're trying to find